On a quiet morning in late August 2024, the coastal city of Praia Grande awoke to a crime so brutal that it shocked the entire country. Neighbors heard yelling and crashing sounds, followed by silence. When police entered the apartment, they found chaos, blood on the floor, broken glass scattered across the rooms. The victim was Igor Pareto, a young and widely admired businessman. He was found dead in his sister's apartment, his body bearing dozens of stab wounds. But what truly shocked was not just the brutality of the act, but the identity of the suspects, the very people Igor trusted the most. How could love, loyalty, and family ties turn to betrayal and murder? And what hidden motives lie beneath this web of passion, jealousy, and ambition? Igor Pareto was born on May 17, 1997, in the state of São Paulo, southeastern Brazil. From the very beginning, his life unfolded within a large and complex family. His father had relationships with different partners over the years, which gave Igor many siblings. Growing up in this unconventional environment shaped his personality, giving him resilience and a sharp awareness of the world around him. Among all these family ties, one bond stood out: the close connection he shared with his younger sister, Marceli Pareto. As a boy, Igor was both determined and restless. He was ambitious, eager to take on challenges, so business quickly became his calling. With a natural ability to recognize opportunities, he never hesitated to take risks to build something of his own. These qualities earned him respect in his community and gradually established him as a rising figure in the business circles of Praia Grande, a coastal city. While his professional life advanced with momentum, his personal life was not always as stable. He had a distant relationship with a child from a previous romance that ended without lasting commitment. Then, toward the end of 2018, everything seemed to change when he met a young woman who embodied everything he had ever dreamed of: Raphaela Costa, a year younger than him. To Igor, she was striking not only for her beauty, but also for her determination, a trait he found magnetic. Raphaela also longed to start a family, and this shared desire created an immediate deep bond between them. Their relationship moved quickly. In June 2019, they welcomed their first child together, a moment that marked a turning point for Igor. Family became his anchor, the foundation of his values, and the source of his deepest pride. He didn't keep this love hidden. On social media, he openly expressed admiration for Raphaela and affection for his children, making it clear to everyone how much they meant to him. By 2022, at just 25 years old, Igor had already launched his first business, a car dealership. As the company grew, so did his ambitions. Soon after, he established a marketing firm and later expanded his automotive ventures by opening a second branch dedicated exclusively to motorcycles. This new project was built in partnership with Mario Vitorino da Silva, his brother-in-law and best friend. Mario, who was married to Marceli, shared with Igor not only the long days of hard work, but also leisure time, family moments, and a sense of loyalty that seemed unshakable. Igor was usually selective in his relationships, cautious about who he allowed into his inner circle. With Mario, however, he let his guard down. Their friendship deepened quickly, marked by trust and brotherhood. A similar closeness developed between Raphaela and Marceli. More than sisters-in-law, they became true friends, supporting one another, building a connection grounded in honesty and complicity. In time, Igor decided to take the next step with Raphaela. He proposed, she accepted, and for a moment, their lives seemed perfectly aligned. But the wedding never came. Instead, their relationship began to weaken. Raphaela then described how alcohol became a destructive agent in Igor's behavior. Under its influence, he grew jealous, Controlling and verbally aggressive, although he never physically assaulted her, there was one night at a bar when his temper escalated into a fight that resulted in criminal charges. The case left a mark on his record, though it had no lasting legal consequences. As the years went by, challenges continued to test Igor and Mario. Both men became targets of an investigation for alleged money laundering. Though they were eventually acquitted, the case fueled gossip and suspicion in their community, leaving an uncomfortable cloud over their reputations. On July 24, 2024, Raphaela made a painful choice. She decided to separate from Igor. At first, he resisted the idea, unwilling to let go, but eventually he respected her decision and moved temporarily into another apartment he owned. During this time apart, Igor devoted himself to change. Convinced that he could win Raphaela back if he transformed himself, he began adopting healthier habits, lost weight. Most importantly, gave up alcohol and other substances that had once fueled his temper. For nearly a month, he worked not only to rebuild his body, but also to regain his self-control. His efforts seemed to pay off. By the end of August, Raphaela agreed to give their relationship another chance, and Igor returned home. For a brief moment, it looked as though life was back on track, but the peace didn't last. The reconciliation collapsed almost as quickly as it had begun. Just weeks after moving back in, Igor and Raphaela separated once more. It was in this fragile context that the fateful night of Friday, the 30th of August, 2024, unfolded. That afternoon, Igor dropped off his children at his mother's house, promising to return later to spend the night, free of responsibilities. He joined his brother-in-law Mario at a party hosted by one of his brothers. It was an annual tradition, made even livelier that year by the celebration of their favorite football team's victory for both Igor and Mario. It was also a welcome distraction from their fractured personal lives. Igor wasn't the only one suffering. Mario, too, had been separated from Marceli for months. Though their divorce wasn't finalized, that same evening, in another part of the city, Raphaela and Marceli went out together. After dinner and drinks at a restaurant, they decided to head to the very same party. Despite knowing that their partners would be there, their intention was simply to see friends and enjoy the night. Inside, the atmosphere grew tense. The women stayed on one side, the men on the other. Words weren't exchanged, but glances occasionally crossed the room, thick with unspoken emotion. As dawn approached, Raphaela and Marceli left together. They got into Raphaela's car. She drove her friend back to the apartment where Marceli was staying. Moments later, Igor and Mario also left the party. Igor tried to request a ride through a taxi app, but Mario insisted on giving him a lift. That decision would change everything. At daybreak on Saturday, August 31, 2024, the quiet of a Praia Grande neighborhood was shattered. Disturbances were reported from an apartment building. The manager, alarmed by loud noises, rang the bell several times. When no one answered, she called the police. Officers arrived swiftly, but their knocks also went unanswered. With the help of a locksmith, they forced the door open. Inside, the scene was chilling. Bloodstains stretched across the kitchen, living room, and dining area. Leading deeper into the apartment, furniture was overturned. Following the trail, officers reached a bedroom where the horror was complete. On the floor lay the body of a young man. It was Igor, just 27 years old. A toppled wardrobe with mirrored doors lay across him, its glass shattered into razor-sharp fragments scattered around the room. In the bathroom, investigators found a bloodied kitchen knife taken from a drawer. The apartment belonged to Marceli, and the victim was her brother. No other person was found inside, but the crime scene itself spoke volumes. The level of violence was extreme, suggesting from the very beginning that this case would become one of the most publicized in Brazil. And in the days that followed, the details that emerged only deepened the shock. Forensic experts confirmed that Igor was killed right where his body was found. He had suffered multiple blunt force injuries and at least 40 stab wounds. Concentrated on his torso, head, and back, the bloodied kitchen knife recovered from the bathroom was identified as the murder weapon. As the brutality of the crime dominated headlines nationwide, investigators turned to the building's security cameras. The footage allowed them to reconstruct the final hours with chilling precision. At 4:32 a.m., Marceli and Raphaela arrived together by car, parked near the entrance, and took the elevator to the 4th floor. Just over an hour later, Raphaela was seen again, this time alone. She entered the elevator and left the building. Only 13 seconds after her departure, another car arrived. At 5:44 a.m., cameras captured Igor and Mario entering the elevator. Igor, phone in hand, appeared to be arguing heatedly with his brother-in-law. 20 minutes later, Mario and Marceli were recorded leaving the apartment. Instead of taking the elevator, they chose the stairs. Minutes after that, garage cameras showed them crossing the parking lot and exiting through the main door. Witness accounts reinforced this timeline. Several neighbors reported hearing shouting from the apartment, rage-filled voices that carried through the walls. They said one man screamed about betrayal, insisting that the people closest to him had conspired behind his back. He cried out that he loved a woman desperately, yet she had deceived him. These testimonies steered investigators toward their first working theory, a crime of passion, born of jealousy and betrayal within the family. With mounting evidence, police identified 3 main suspects: Marceli, 20 years old, Mario, 23, and Raphaela, 26. A judge swiftly issued arrest warrants, ordering that the trio be held for 30 days. But when officers moved in, the suspects had vanished. As the search intensified, investigators uncovered another crucial detail. While Igor and Mario were driving earlier that night, Mario had received a phone call. His phone was connected to the car's multimedia system, and the caller's name, Raphaela, flashed across the dashboard. Igor was stunned. At first, he fell silent, then exploded with rage. The festive atmosphere of the evening evaporated instantly. Igor flooded Raphaela with calls and messages, demanding answers. But she never replied. Checking their location-sharing app, he discovered she was at Marceli's apartment. Furious, Igor ordered Mario to take him there. Warned by Mario and by Igor's barrage of messages, Raphaela slipped out just minutes before the men arrived. Igor's sudden death left the Pareto family reeling, grief mixed with scandal. Ultimately, custody went to Igor's mother. Then, on September 6, less than a week after the murder, Marceli and Raphaela voluntarily surrendered to the civil police. Around the same time, Mario's abandoned car was located near a post office. Inside, investigators found suspected bloodstains on the gear shift and seat, along with a bottle. The vehicle was seized and sent to the Directorate of Criminalistics for forensic testing. Days later, an anonymous tip from one of Igor's brothers led police to Mario. He was discovered hiding in a house less than 200 meters from Praia Grande, at the home of relatives connected to Raphaela's family. His short time on the run ended immediately. With all 3 suspects in custody, interrogations began and contradictions surfaced at once. Each gave a different version of events, yet all agreed on one shocking detail: Raphaela and Mario were secretly involved. Marceli claimed she only learned of the affair that night. Raphaela went further, admitting that in the early hours of that morning, she and Marceli had also shared an intimate encounter, though she insisted it was the first and only time. Through her lawyer, Marceli stated that when Igor and Mario arrived at the apartment, She was alone, half-dressed, under the influence of alcohol and other substances. She admitted hearing them argue, but assumed it was another of their frequent disputes and chose not to intervene. According to her version, while she was in the dressing room, getting dressed, Igor kicked a mirror, shattering it in a fit of rage. When she went out, she found he was seriously injured. Mario presented a different account. He alleged that Igor attacked him with shards of glass from the broken mirror. Photographs of superficial injuries were submitted in support of this claim, but investigators noted that they had been taken more than 2 weeks after the killing, casting serious doubt on their credibility. Raphaela, meanwhile, denied any direct role in the attack. She explained that Igor had often threatened to kill her if she ever betrayed him, and so she fled the apartment out of fear for her life. While driving to her mother's house, she got a message from Mario. He said he had to drug Igor to keep him calm and warned her to not come near. According to her testimony, it was not until the following morning, at a gas station meeting with Mario and Marcelli, that she learned Igor was dead. In shock, but unable to process the situation, she nevertheless stayed with them as they tried to cover their tracks. At one point, she said, she left Marcelli with family members while she accompanied Mario to buy clean clothes because his were blood-stained. The two then checked into a hotel, where Mario showered and changed. Soon afterward, Raphaela abandoned him and returned to the city. Detectives, however, reconstructed a very different scenario. Their working hypothesis was that Mario and Raphaela had conspired in advance. Screenshots of text messages exchanged hours before the murder revealed discussions about spending the night together, celebrating their football team's championship victory. For prosecutors, the motive was clear. Igor stood in the way of their affair, and his death promised financial gain. Mario would assume sole control of the motorcycle dealership, while Raphaela, mother of Igor's son, would obtain inheritance rights. As Mario's wife, Marcelli would also benefit indirectly. On these grounds, all three were formally charged with aggravated homicide, based on vile motives, préméditation. Investigators stressed the brutality of the betrayal. Igor had been killed not by strangers, but by people he trusted most. In response, the suspects began adjusting their narratives. Raphaela denied helping Mario hide, despite the fact that he was captured at a property belonging to her relatives. Marcelli insisted she had seen nothing because of intoxication and claimed Mario entered the apartment on his own, using a code he already knew. Collectively, they attempted to portray Igor as unstable, violent, and threatening. Prosecutors, however, rejected these defenses. They highlighted that the shattered wardrobe had collapsed on top of Igor, suggesting he had been pushed rather than having caused the damage himself. They also noted that if Mario had truly acted in self-defense, the number of stab wounds would not have reached dozens, and at least one of the three would have sought medical assistance instead of fleeing. Later, Marcelli's defense requested a second autopsy, though without explaining what new findings it might produce. The move angered members of Igor's family, who accused her of deliberately delaying proceedings and prolonging their suffering. By this point, one fact was undeniable. The case had become one of Brazil's most complex and emotionally charged criminal proceedings, marked by betrayal, hidden relationships, and financial motives. The courts determined that Raphaela, Marcelli, and Mario would remain in preventive detention without a fixed release date while awaiting trial. Throughout 2025, multiple hearings were held. New witnesses came forward. The civil police delegate, who led the early investigation, testified, and further evidence was presented. The court announced that the case would likely proceed before a jury. By early July, after the evidentiary phase was completed, the tribunal denied all defense requests for release. The judge emphasized the exceptional brutality of the crime, the manipulation of evidence, and the defendant's attempts to flee as decisive reasons for keeping them in custody. As of today, the case remains pending. Brazilian society continues to follow every development closely, waiting to see whether the justice system will deliver a fair and transparent verdict, or whether the web of contradictions, betrayals, and alleged manipulation will obscure the truth.
Everyone, today we will learn about another case, the case of Mark Angelucci. In modern life, delivery services have become an indispensable part. Bringing convenience by everything is delivered to the door. However, along with this convenience, malicious individuals can easily impersonate delivery staff to commit harmful acts, including murder. On July 11, 2020, at a house in Cedar Pines Park, California, a courier knocked on the door of Mark Angelucci, a 52-year-old successful lawyer. Mark wasn't expecting any deliveries that day, so the courier's visit felt unusual. He thought the delivery man might be carrying work-related documents. When Mark opened the door, the courier handed him a package and asked him to sign for it. As Mark reached to take the package and sign, the courier unexpectedly pulled out a weapon and attacked him multiple times. Mark was hit and fell to the ground. The attacker quickly fled the scene, leaving Mark bleeding on his doorstep. Tragically, he died of blood loss just minutes before the ambulance arrived. The only evidence left behind by the attacker was the bullets lodged in Mark's body. It was clear that the attack was not a robbery, as nothing was taken from the house. The killer's actions indicated a deep-seated hatred for the victim. The assailant attacked him at point-blank range, clearly targeting vital organs to ensure he would not survive. Detectives began their investigation by looking into the victim's close acquaintances to identify anyone who might have harbored animosity toward him or if there had been any recent disputes. Detectives also interviewed a friend of the victim, Cassie J. Mark played a significant role in Cassie's life. Although they were not romantically involved, Cassie met him while working on a documentary. She was taken aback by how different he was from the typical lawyer stereotype. Mark was genuine, positive, and cheerful, passionately discussing his work. He was not driven by profit and dedicated considerable time to volunteer efforts. Cassie and Mark had a strong bond built on mutual respect. She viewed him as her greatest source of support and protection. As a result, she struggled to cope with his absence. Cassie regarded him almost as family, noting that he never abandoned her during tough times. When she married in 2018, Mark traveled 7 hours to congratulate her. Mark is a well-known and respected individual who maintains multiple social media accounts. He regularly updates his followers on his career achievements and shares motivational messages. Additionally, he provides consulting services and is dedicated to his work. Instead of starting a family, Mark chose to focus on his career as his top priority and true passion, which has helped him become one of the best lawyers in the state. Throughout his career, he has accumulated considerable wealth, owns a large house, and drives a luxury car. He always dresses smartly and maintains a neat appearance. During an in-depth investigation into Mark's activities, the police discovered that he was involved in the men's rights movement. He joined this movement while studying law after witnessing his friends struggle to obtain help from the police following an incident of domestic violence. Mark also supported men in securing custody during divorce cases, often providing these services for free with the assistance of a well-resourced lawyer. He viewed this work as a way to contribute to a better future for the American community. In 1997, Mark aimed to highlight the challenges men face in legal situations, advocating for equal rights for both men and women, and for fair treatment regardless of gender. His actions could be interpreted in many different ways and could cause hostility, leading to him being attacked. Given that Mark was a popular lawyer without any family, Cassie worried that the investigation could lose momentum without appropriate attention from from relatives. Consequently, she became an activist, urging the authorities to take action. Later, Cassie wrote a book and produced a film about him. The police were struggling to find leads, and the lockdown made the situation even more difficult. Cassie decided to take an active role in searching for the person responsible. She believed that there were no potential murderers among Mark's close friends and thought the crime might be a random act of revenge. However, she was convinced that Mark's legal work held the key to solving the case. Mark often represents less wealthy clients, and each win can cause resentment among influential people, which can spur an unstable individual to action. To identify potential suspects, the police needed to interview many people and review Mark's recent cases. Unfortunately, they were unable to gather any useful information. On July 19, 2020, just a week after the Mark attack occurred, an unknown attacker opened fire at the home of New Jersey District Judge Esther Salas. Her college-age son, Daniel Anderl, answered the door and briefly spoke with a courier before being attacked in the chest. After Daniel fell, the assailant attacked at Mark 3 times. Both were seriously injured but survived as the attacker fled. Judge Esther was in the basement during the attack and remained unharmed. Given the severity of the attack, the FBI was brought in to assist local law enforcement in identifying the person who fired attacks at the judge's home. Authorities believed there was a connection between the two attacks, even though they occurred in different states and at different times. After conducting ballistics tests, investigators confirmed that the same .380 caliber pistol was used in both attacks, reinforcing their theory of a single attacker. Additionally, several neighbors reported seeing a light-colored car leaving the area. The attacker wore a mask, making it difficult for witnesses to provide a description. With the motive still unclear, law enforcement officials were concerned that the killer might strike again, potentially targeting others connected to the judicial system. It appears that Judge Esther Salas was the target of the second attack. Esther had an impressive career, even running for the Senate in 2011. She lived with her husband, Mark, who worked in the justice system as a prosecutor and later as an attorney. Esther worked hard to achieve success, starting as a public defender and consistently studying hard, believing that education would be the key to realizing her dreams. She ultimately rose to become one of the leaders in her field. Daniel's parents were both dedicated and hardworking individuals. They often handled multiple cases simultaneously. In 2018, he decided to pursue a career in law and enrolled in law school. He was accepted into the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., a prestigious institution with many notable alumni. After Daniel started school, his parents maintained constant communication with him. They described Daniel as a good kid who didn't associate with bad influences, was naturally distanced from criminal activities, and was not aggressive. He had no enemies, did not suffer from mental health issues, and had not encountered any problems in recent months. The assault on this cheerful and active young man was a devastating blow to both his family and their tight-knit community, particularly for Daniel's girlfriend. Relatives of Daniel reported that, on July 17, he had spent time with friends. It was a lovely day, and he celebrated his 20th birthday with his parents and closest friends. No one could have predicted that this gathering would be their last together. During his meeting with Daniel, there were no mentions of any issues. Everything appeared to be fine. Daniel was not an aggressive person, making it difficult to believe he had any dangerous enemies. 2 days later, there was a knock at the door. Mark looked over the railing from the second floor and saw a man in a courier uniform standing outside with a large package. He was surprised that a courier would come on a Sunday, a day when delivery services usually do not operate. No one was expecting any deliveries, especially during the lockdown, which made the situation even more unusual. Before anyone could react, Daniel cheerfully went to the door and opened it. According to Daniel's father, The courier asked Daniel to call for Judge Esther Salas to sign for a delivery envelope. While Daniel hesitated, trying to remember where his mother might be, his father started to go down the stairs to the door. Suddenly, explosions rang out. Mark likely startled the attacker, who then opened fire, hitting him as he instinctively tried to shield himself. By the time Esther emerged from the basement, her son had been attacked in the chest, and her husband had been struck by 3 bullets. The attacker had already escaped. Immediately, she called 911. Daniel and Mark were quickly taken to the hospital, where doctors worked hard to stabilize them. Daniel was Mark and Esther's only son. Before his birth, Esther endured 3 heartbreaking miscarriages, which were very difficult for her to handle. She and her husband had longed for a child, but faced repeated disappointments. When Daniel was born, it felt like a miracle and the realization of their dream for their family. They had high expectations for him. Despite serious injuries, Daniel remained conscious and became an important witness for the police. Detectives came to interview him in his hospital room. Daniel could only catch a brief glimpse of the attacker and was unable to provide a detailed description, as the attacker was wearing a mask. Sadly, his condition worsened, and he passed away, leaving his family devastated. Many loved ones gathered to support them during this tragic time. News of the attack on the courier quickly spread, causing widespread panic. With the attacker still at large, no one felt safe. Police have faced pressure to speed up their investigation, but the 2020 lockdown has severely hampered their efforts to solve the 2 murders. Law enforcement continued to sift through the limited information available, while multiple federal and state agencies were investigating Andrel's murder. Another case was unfolding 150 miles away in the Catskill Mountains of New York State. Police discovered an abandoned vehicle and a body on a dead-end road. An identification card found at the scene revealed that the deceased was Roy Den Hollander, a 72-year-old lawyer from New York. The small community was shocked by this crime, as violent incidents were extremely rare in the area, with the crime rate nearly at 0. It is unusual, considering that Roy is a seasoned attorney with considerable experience. Could this be another murder mystery linked to a series of attacks on individuals within the justice system? However, unlike typical crime scenes, a gun was found next to Roy's body, raising suspicions that he may have taken his own life. Police have determined that the gun used in the case was a .30 380, and ballistics tests have confirmed that it matches the bullet that killed Mark and Daniel, as well as Roy himself. Detectives speculated that Roy might have attacked the judge's family before traveling to upstate New York, where he eventually took his own life. As investigators continued to search Roy's crime scene, they found a FedEx envelope addressed to Judge Esther Salas and a home address in San Bernardino County, California, in his car. Investigators also learned that Roy took a cross-country train ride to California in early July. He is seen here at the San Bernardino train station on July 7, 2020, wearing a medical mask and holding a cup of coffee, and was later seen on other security cameras as he approached Mark's home. These evidences suggested his involvement in both murders, although his motive remained unclear. Detectives began investigating Roy's background and uncovered several troubling details. They examined his computer and phone, revealing that he had written a memoir filled with questionable content, almost 2,000 pages long. After reviewing his diaries, the police concluded that he was an unstable individual with mental health issues. The dedication in his book stated, "To my mother, may she burn in hell." In it, Roy expressed his hatred toward his mother, blaming her for his lack of maternal love and care during his childhood. He also attributed his brother's death, which occurred under mysterious circumstances before Roy's birth, to her neglect. After she passed away, he scattered her ashes in the grass as a tribute to his late brother. Roy was an impressive and articulate lawyer who joined a local human rights organization. By 1999, he had built a strong resume, but he had one major flaw: his obsession with women. He frequented clubs and bars, often seeking out girls aged 16 to 18. During this time, he became infatuated with a model and eventually married a 20-year-old named Angelina. After moving to the United States together, their relationship quickly became troubled. They soon filed for divorce, each accusing the other of abuse. Roy's memoir included many sexist and racist comments, revealing his misogynistic views, which suggests that his wife's claims of abuse may have had some basis in reality. In his journal, Roy expressed deep anger toward women, especially his ex-wife, whom he labeled a stripper with questionable morals. He felt used by her, believing she had taken advantage of him to obtain her green card before leaving him after a challenging divorce. This contributed to Roy developing a hatred for all women and becoming a strong advocate for men's rights. He initiated multiple lawsuits to protect men's interests, targeting places like bars and clubs that allowed women free entry. He also sued Columbia University, his former school, accusing it of being sexist. Although he lost these legal battles, he continued to passionately advocate for men's rights. Thus, it was surprising that his first murder victim was Mark, a fellow men's rights activist and anti-feminist lawyer who seemingly shared Roy's views. To understand the motive behind the murder, police interviewed Roy's former colleagues. They revealed that Roy believed Mark was infringing on his legal territory, as both were part of the same community fighting for men's rights. This community sought to promote equality between men and women while opposing any form of insult or degradation. However, Roy had been expelled from this group due to his inappropriate behavior. Members of the coalition rejected the misogyny that Roy displayed. After his divorce, Roy was facing significant personal issues, and his professional life was deteriorating as well. He lost numerous legal cases, went bankrupt, and fell into alcoholism. There were also rumors about his substance use. Despite these struggles, Roy viewed himself as a public figure and often shared odd videos online, displaying erratic behavior, including episodes of anger. While many people dismissed his actions, those close to him realized that he was in an alarming state, but no one intervened in time. In 2018, Roy announced on social media that he had been diagnosed with terminal melanoma. He expressed frustration over not receiving adequate medical assistance and even sued the hospital for negligence. The case was dismissed. It appeared that Roy was seeking public attention or trying to explain his professional setbacks. He continued this behavior until July 2020. Meanwhile, Mark and Esther were experiencing career success, frequently appearing on television and gaining popularity. Despite their rising careers, neither Mark nor Esther nor their colleagues viewed Roy as a threat. He did not attend men's rights conferences, did not make threats, and had limited interactions with potential victims, so no one suspected he posed any danger. The night before the crime, Roy lost another case. After he filed an appeal, Judge Esther Salas denied his motion, and he was later removed from the case when the client switched lawyers. Frustrated, he wrote an angry journal entry, criticizing Judge Esther for being lazy and incompetent. Possibly this became the turning point for the murder, but primarily, he decided to eliminate his competitor, Mark. Now, the motives for the crime became clear. The next victims of this tragedy were Daniel and his father, Mark. Daniel's father thought that Roy's first bullet was meant for him, but Daniel bravely defended his father and lost his life in the process. In reality, Mark suffered 3 serious injuries and spent a long time in the hospital. Thankfully, none were life-threatening. He pleaded with the police to find the person responsible for his son's death. Fortunately, the criminal did not harm anyone else and eventually took his own life with the same weapon he used to kill his 2 victims. On the last day of his life, Roy went to the Catskill Mountains that later became his burial site. This location is famous for trout fishing and is surrounded by luxurious homes. The FBI discovered that Roy had spent his childhood at a nearby refugee camp, suggesting that this place held significant meaning for him, possibly representing the happiest times of his life. As the police examined Roy's troubling notes, they found a list of names that included lawyers, prominent doctors, and other medical professionals who appeared to be next on his list. Detectives noted that none of the individuals on the list had been harmed by Roy except for 2 previous victims. It seemed he may have intended to target them, but changed his mind, possibly due to a decline in his health, which ultimately led him to take his own life. Investigators were still uncertain if he acted alone or had accomplices. They alerted everyone on the list about the potential danger in case Roy's associates became active. The individuals were scared and requested protection. Meanwhile, detectives needed time to sort through a large volume of information, including 2,000 pages of Roy's memoirs. After a lengthy examination of the potential victims list, the police were still unable to determine what motivated Roy to harm them. It seemed that all of this was unfounded. This ultimately managed to calm all the people on the list, as the FBI agents established that Roy acted alone and had no accomplices. Forensic psychiatrists determined that his actions were indicative of psychosis, stemming from personal disorders and significant life struggles. 6 months after the attack, Judge Esther Salas's husband, Mark, is still recovering, though progress has been slow. Meanwhile, Esther has begun advocating for changes in state law to strengthen protections for judges. She specifically called for a ban on the public release of judges' personal information, a necessary step to prevent disgruntled criminals from seeking revenge after adverse rulings. In November 2020, Esther was successful in this effort. The new law, named after her son, was signed into law by the governor of New Jersey. Since then, judges' addresses have no longer been publicly available in the state, marking a significant change from the past when this information was easily accessible online. Esther believes this measure will better protect judges and judicial staff, who are often at risk of being attacked by disgruntled defendants. Her own devastating loss, the death of her son, best exemplifies this threat. Now, Esther Salas and Mark Angelucci are taking this effort to the federal level, calling on Congress to consider and pass similar legislation. For them, this is more than just a legal fight. It is also a way to honor the memory of their son, Daniel, who tragically died at the age of 20. They view Daniel's death as a cowardly act of revenge and are determined to use this loss as motivation to push for justice and protect others in the future. Hello everyone. Today, we will learn about another case, the case of Robin Baxter. The suburb of Louisville, New Albany, was one of the most prosperous areas in the state of Indiana, USA. Situated on the banks of the Ohio River, it was a lively community known for its peaceful atmosphere as well as its vibrant nightlife. Young people here enjoyed a lot of entertainment. Some people would regularly host parties, and there was always a way to spend the evening in the company of friends. When Robin moved to the area, she quickly made new friends, sociable and friendly. She planned to pursue an education and eventually get married within a few months of moving. Robin met a boyfriend named Christopher Baxter. This was her first serious relationship, as she had only had brief, unsuccessful dates in high school at that time. Robin was focused on her college studies and not too concerned about dating, however. Everything changed when Christopher entered her life. He was older, and despite her youth and inexperience, she managed to connect with him emotionally. They began dating and eventually got married after their wedding. Robin found a job while continuing her studies, planning to have children with her husband. Then, in mid-June 1990, Robin suddenly disappeared for several days. Christopher tried to contact her by phone, but received no answer. Christopher reached out to her family in hopes of finding her. He explained that they had argued the night before, and when he woke up the next morning, she was gone. Christopher suspected that Robin had gone to stay with her parents after their fight. He wanted to apologize and bring her back home, but her family confirmed that she was not with them. Both he and Robin's family grew increasingly worried. The news that her husband didn't know where Robin was raised serious concerns. Robin's mother and sister, who lived nearby, got into a car and drove around town, hoping to find her. Christopher was doing the same thing. They searched the nearest residential areas, the vicinity of Christopher's house, the grocery store, and any other places where Robin might have gone. Unfortunately, they found no trace of her. Christopher and Robin's relatives contacted the police to report her missing at the police station. He detailed how he and Robin's loved ones had already checked all her usual hangouts but found no signs of her. Initially, the officers didn't seem very interested in the report, as they believed an adult woman could take care of herself and wasn't required to inform anyone of her whereabouts. Christopher and Robin's family members rejected the idea that Robin simply disappeared without a trace. They believed it was unlikely she would vanish without informing anyone. Even if something unusual had happened, she would have likely reached out to her family at the first opportunity. Eventually, her family convinced the police that Robin might be in danger, which prompted them to begin a search for her, worried that the police might not act quickly enough. Christopher took matters into his own hands. He went to a local news station to report his wife's disappearance. Seeking help from the community, he shared information about Robin, including a photograph and a description of her clothing. At the time she went missing, Christopher hoped that Robin was with friends or relatives and was trying to reach out to everyone to gather any important information. Unfortunately, no one knew where she was or what might have happened to her. The following day, workers from the local power station went to inspect the sewer drains for maintenance after identifying a clog during their investigation. One technician noticed something alarming in the water that resembled a body. As a result, all work ceased and the police were summoned. Along with divers who retrieved the body, it was a woman, found without clothing from the waist down, and she had sustained serious injuries to her head and face. Her body was sent for forensic examination to determine her identity. Christopher learned about this disturbing discovery and feared it might be his missing wife. After checking dental records, the medical examiner confirmed that the body was indeed Robin Baxter, given that the body was found in the river. Law enforcement initially considered the possibility of end one's own life. Suspecting that the woman might have drowned, they contacted Christopher to see if Robin could have taken her own life. However, Christopher stated that this was impossible, as Robin was afraid of water and could not swim, even if she had been feeling desperate. He believed she would not have chosen that method. Christopher asserted that Robin did not have any mental health issues and was generally cheerful. With a bright future ahead of her, he was convinced that she had been murdered and that her body had been disposed of in the water. In a news conference, Christopher expressed his suspicions and stated that the person responsible for his wife's death would be brought to justice. Christopher informed her relatives about the tragic news, leaving everyone in shock. The severity of the situation was overwhelming for them based on the lack of clothing found. It appeared that Robin may have been abused and possibly fought back, which could have led to her death. This was a devastating blow for the entire family, as they never imagined such a turn of events. The medical examiner discovered multiple blunt force injuries on her head and face. The cause of death was identified as a traumatic brain injury caused by a severe blow to the back of her head, resulting in internal bleeding. It was determined that Robin had been repeatedly beaten before her body was disposed of in the river. The medical examiner indicated that she likely died before entering the water, as no water was found in her lungs. The possibility of abuse was quickly ruled out. No evidence was discovered. Detectives also dismissed the possibility of voluntary end her life. This was clearly ruled a murder, with evidence suggesting an attempted cover-up that hinted at abuse to mislead the investigation. Detectives pieced together the events of the day. Robin disappeared and found that she had planned to attend a party hosted by her friends Douglas, Stephen, and Rick, who lived nearby. Witnesses confirmed that Robin did attend the party. Investigators discovered that all three men had minor legal issues in the past, but none were violent. They lived together to share living expenses. Her husband was familiar with them and distrusted them. Believing they were dangerous, he suspected that one or all of them were involved in her disappearance. Christopher even went to their house to confront them about Robin, but they denied any wrongdoing. Detectives later questioned Douglas, Stephen, and Rick individually. Each provided the same alibi, supporting one another's accounts and confirming that Robin was indeed at the party that evening. They stated there were no conflicts and that she was socializing with others. After 8 p.m., they claimed she simply left, and no one knew what happened to her afterward. The men spoke in a way that seemed consistent, repeating each other's statements without contradicting themselves. Even when faced with the detectives' tactics, however, it was possible that they had conspired to protect one another. At that time, law enforcement had no evidence against them, so they were released but remained on the list of suspects. Their statements led detectives to a new lead. That evening, the victim had spent significant time with one of the men. Eventually, she left the gathering with a person named Eugene, a friend and former friend from school. The police interviewed him, and he claimed he had walked Robin home because it was late. But could there be something more concerning behind this? Following this, a lengthy investigation phase began, during which detectives collected and analyzed information. The public's mood was tense. Residents feared that a dangerous criminal was on the loose in New Albany, creating a sense of insecurity. The motive for the crime was unclear, and there were no solid leads, heightening concerns about potential new victims. Amid this uncertainty, numerous rumors began to circulate, given the circumstances surrounding the party. Many locals speculated that Robin may have been involved in an affair. This speculation was particularly painful for Christopher, who refused to accept that his wife could lead a double life. He insisted he was unaware of any affairs and believed his wife was respectable and not promiscuous. When rumors of infidelity circulated, several witnesses informed the police that Robin might have had an affair with Eugene, the man she left the party with. Eugene had been her friend before she started dating Christopher, leading to speculation that she may have kept in touch with him and met secretly without her husband's knowledge. However, when the police questioned Eugene again, he denied having a serious relationship with Robin. He claimed they had only a few casual encounters in their youth and rarely communicated, describing their relationship as that of good acquaintances. There was no evidence to dispute his statement, making Eugene an unlikely suspect. As he had no motive to harm her, detectives also received a tip from an anonymous source stating that on the night of Robin's disappearance, she was in a car with 3 men, including Rick, Stephen, and another man. The witness reported seeing the men making unwanted advances toward her, but Robin rejected them and appeared to be trying to escape. However, the witness did not see how the situation concluded. When questioned again at the police station, the men confirmed they had been in the car with Robin until Eugene arrived, insisting that there was no harassment involved. The men claimed they lived together in a partnership that was more serious than friendship. Their living arrangement was peculiar, especially since rumors about unconventional relationships were circulating. The police later confirmed that there was insufficient evidence to charge any of the suspects. In the end, the detectives failed to uncover the murder weapon or any other crucial evidence. Robin had not been abused, and no foreign DNA was found on her body, although it was possible that it had been washed away. The case went cold. There were attempts to reopen the investigation and analyze the collected information with new technology, but no progress was made until 2011. That year, a new officer transferred from the patrol division to the Criminal Investigations Department, where his father had worked for 35 years and had become somewhat of a legend. For him, Getting this role was a great privilege, so he was committed to investigating the case diligently and seeking justice. He had heard about Robin Baxter, who had gone missing in 1990. The investigator reviewed all the collected information again. From the start, the investigator was puzzled as to why the case remained unresolved. Many suspects had alibis and were released without further questioning. Upon reviewing their backgrounds, the detective noted that they did not fit the profile of criminals. He first considered a crucial question. Why would anyone want to harm Robin? Described as a respectable woman, Robin was married, not involved in crime, and had no legal troubles. Her disappearance and brutal murder were baffling. As they seemed utterly disconnected from her life, the archive documents included many names of witnesses, and it was important to speak with all of them again. While reviewing the documents, the detective discovered a crucial note. Several individuals on the list had not been contacted by the police in 1990. One of them was Christopher's neighbor, Charles, who was thought to have valuable information during the initial investigation. Attempts to reach him were unsuccessful, therefore. It was decided to meet with him and to follow up with all the suspects from the original investigation. 3 men, Douglas, Rick, and Stephen, were the primary suspects, but the investigator was disappointed to find that all of them had died from AIDS. Despite this, further investigation showed that none of them had a motive for the attack. They are gay, which made them unlikely suspects in Robin's murder. Although she had interacted with them often, their relationship was strictly platonic. Eugene, Robin's ex-friend, remained a suspect in the case. As the police examined the evidence, they began to focus more on Robin's husband, Christopher. The brutality of the attack suggested that the killer was likely familiar with the victim. It appeared that there was a personal motive behind the murder, possibly stemming from jealousy or revenge. The detective suspected that both Christopher and Eugene might have been involved in a love triangle, giving them both reasons for a violent confrontation. There were also rumors that Robin had been having an affair, prompting the investigator to look for connections between the suspects and the crime. Meanwhile, the new detective interviewed Charles, who lived next door to the Christopher's house in 1990. Charles mentioned that he had never been questioned about the case, but that he had valuable information. He reported hearing screams and signs of a struggle coming from Christopher's house after midnight. On the night Robin disappeared, he saw Robin outside, wearing a black t-shirt, denim shorts, and flip-flops. She looked visibly shaken and had what appeared to be blood on her face. Despite his offer of help, she refused. Charles noted that he was an experienced builder and frequently handled renovations. The day after their argument, Christopher came to him with a question about how to replace the drywall in a room. This was surprising because Christopher had recently completed renovations and had previously sought advice on similar topics. This raised questions about why he needed to replace new materials. A troubling discovery was made in the Baxter family archive, a photograph showing Christopher with a metal rod. Robin's relatives claimed he referred to it as his equalizer, which he kept by his bed for self-defense against potential attacks. This equalizer mysteriously vanished and has never been located. Detectives now had information suggesting that Christopher was likely responsible for his wife's death, possibly using the metal rod to beat her. It appeared that Christopher had to replace the drywall because the murder took place in their bedroom, which was left stained with blood, and he wanted to eliminate the evidence by starting renovations. While this theory seemed reasonable, concrete evidence was needed to charge him. Law enforcement managed to access what was believed to be the crime scene, where new residents now lived in the bedroom. The drywall was still present. The homeowner reported accidentally damaging the wall while moving furniture and discovered something interesting behind it: a heavy aluminum rod, a towel, and a glove. These items were collected and sent to a lab for analysis, where both Christopher's DNA and Robin's blood were found on them. This evidence suggested that there was now enough to put Chris behind bars. Earlier, Christopher told the police that he had argued with his wife but denied killing her. he explained that on June 19, 1990, he had a serious argument with her and then went to bed. The next morning, he was surprised to find that she was missing during the argument. Christopher broke the glass on the back door and injured himself. Yet, he maintained that he did not physically harm his wife and that he simply went to sleep. However, his statements contradicted numerous witness accounts of ongoing disputes between the couple. Many people believed that Christopher regularly abused her and showed cruelty in their marriage, despite past claims that nothing happened and that his wife had just run away after their fight. New evidence emerged after a possible murder weapon was found: a metal rod. The investigator visited the widow to discuss a case that had been reopened after 20 years. People close to the suspect reported that he often made strange comments, particularly when he was drinking, which suggested he felt guilty about her death. On February 2, 2012, Christopher Baxter was arrested and charged with murder. He became anxious during the arrest, raised his hands, and requested a lawyer, refusing to confess to the crime. During questioning, he claimed that he had a heated argument with his wife on the night she disappeared. Both he and his wife, Robin, had been drinking after attending a party. After Robin was driven home by Eugene, he accused her of cheating, which made him extremely angry. Eventually, he went to sleep, however. According to a neighbor's testimony and the prosecution's perspective, the situation escalated into a violent confrontation. He allegedly picked up a metal rod from near the wall and struck his wife multiple times in the head and face. Robin ran out into the street, where a neighbor noticed her distress. However, her husband was unable to calm down and pursued her, eventually picking her up in his car instead of taking her home. They drove to the Ohio River, where their argument continued. Tragically, Robin received a severe blow to the back of her head, which caused her to lose consciousness and die shortly after. To cover up his actions, Christopher disposed of her body by throwing it into the river from a bridge, removing her pants and underwear to make it look like the abuse had occurred. This case has finally come to light. The trial began as a challenging case, facing numerous delays for various reasons. There were also issues with some pieces of evidence. Despite this, the trial proceeded, and throughout the process, Christopher never admitted to any wrongdoing. The prosecution presented testimony from several witnesses who reported hearing frequent screaming coming from the Baxter home, leading them to believe that Christopher frequently assaulted Robin. In contrast, Christopher's lawyer argued that these accusations were fabricated and that the authorities were simply trying to resolve the case by any means. The prosecution argued that the number and severity of Robin's injuries suggested premeditated murder, pointing out that only Christopher had a motive against her. The jury ultimately sided with the prosecution, resulting in Christopher Baxter being sentenced to 55 years in prison. The defense continued to fight and submitted multiple appeals. After 22 years of freedom, the killer was finally sentenced to a long prison term. The reason the police could not prove his guilt from the start may be because Christopher portrayed himself as a grieving widower, making people not suspect him of involvement in the crime. Christopher appealed various aspects of the 1990 sentencing law. Ultimately, his sentence was reduced to 40 years, however. He was released early in August 2020 and has been keen to keep his life out of the spotlight ever since. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore, the case of Lois Heather Mack. Lois Heather Mack was born in 1995 to the famous musician and composer James Mack and his wife, Sheila Von Weiss, as their only child. She received all the attention from her parents, coming from a wealthy family. Heather enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle and had access to everything she wanted. The family was very close-knit, like many other happy families, and they often went on vacation together. However, in 2001, when Heather was only 6 years old, they went on a cruise with Royal Caribbean. During the trip, James injured his leg. Unfortunately, the doctor on board was not very specialized, and when James finally received adequate medical care, he was left partially paralyzed. He later filed a lawsuit against the company, which was only settled after more than 10 years in the last years of his life. James bravely fought colon cancer despite these hardships. Family vacations remained a cherished tradition for them. In 2006, James died at the age of 77 from a pulmonary embolism in his hotel room while on vacation in Athens. After his death, his wife, Sheila, took his body to a Greek morgue and then continued their vacation in Santorini with their daughter, Heather. During this time, Heather, who was then 10 years old, began to develop negative feelings toward her mother. It is possible that the emotional turmoil stemmed from the death of her father just 5 days before his death. James's will named Heather as the sole heir to his multi-million-dollar fortune. However, in 2011, a lawsuit that James had filed against a cruise line for the incident that left him paralyzed was settled, resulting in a $5 million payout to Heather according to the will. Despite this, the judge awarded $500 of that money to Sheila over time. The relationship between mother and daughter became increasingly strained. Heather began skipping school and hanging out with a bad group of friends. She started stealing and rebelling against her mother over petty issues, even running away from home at night. While some might consider this behavior typical teenage rebellion, Heather's actions escalated. She stole money from her mother during arguments and spent large sums of money on a room in a luxury hotel. Heather's mother, Sheila, confided to friends that Heather frequently attacked her and became increasingly aggressive over the years. She was extremely defiant and cruel to Sheila. After each instance of stealing money or a credit card, the two would get into violent fights. During these arguments, Heather would bite and hit her mother, forcing Sheila to call the police each time. As her daughter's rebellious behavior escalated, Sheila felt increasingly unable to protect herself from the selfish and spoiled teenager. In her senior year, 15-year-old Heather fell in love with Tommy Schaefer, an unemployed young man who claimed to be a rapper. Tommy was raised by his mother alone after his father abandoned the family. According to Tommy's friends, he often lied or exaggerated his story to gain attention. Sheila saw him as a negative influence on her already troubled daughter and openly disapproved of their relationship. Despite Sheila's disapproval, Tommy and Heather bonded over their shared experiences of loss. Tommy had been abandoned by his father as a child, and Heather's father had died when she was 10. Together, they fantasized about spending Heather's inheritance, but Sheila was determined to prevent it. One day, after another argument, Heather and her boyfriend checked into a hotel. Sheila, realizing that her credit card was missing, reported the incident to the police. This further soured the relationship between Sheila and her daughter. In February 2011, during a heated argument, Heather pushed her mother into the bathroom, causing Sheila to fall and break her arm. After the incident, Heather refused to let her mother call for help and hung up the phone. These actions clearly showed that Heather did not love her mother. She often broke household items, and Sheila's friends knew how difficult it was to control Heather's behavior. In January 2012, after a heated argument, Heather ran away again, breaking plates and picture frames in their home. It was evident that Heather had been arguing with her mother frequently before leaving the house. Despite the constant verbal abuse and attacks, Sheila never chose to press charges against Heather. Even though friends and the police suggested that she do so, Sheila did not want her daughter to get into legal trouble and believed that, over time, Heather would mature and their relationship would gradually improve. Concerned about her daughter, Sheila decided to move from their high-rise apartment in Oak River to Chicago, hoping that a change of scenery would help Heather feel better. However, shortly after the move, Heather became pregnant with Tommy's child and dropped out of high school. Heather claimed that she had 2 abortions due to pressure from her mother in the last 3 years before the tragedy. Sheila suffered physical and mental abuse. Sheila then decided to take her daughter on a vacation to Bali, Indonesia. She wanted to spend time with her daughter to mend their strained relationship. After arriving in Bali, they checked into the luxurious St. Regis Hotel. choosing a beautiful room. They took happy photos together. Sadly, Sheila had no idea that a terrible plan was about to unfold a few months earlier. Tommy had confided in his cousin, Robert Bibbs, about an unpleasant request from his girlfriend, Heather. She believed that the only way to escape her mother's control was to kill her, which she thought would also prevent an unwanted abortion. Tommy told Robert that after Sheila died, they would inherit millions of dollars from her. He also said that Heather was planning to hire a hitman to kill Sheila. Although Robert was shocked to hear this, he suggested that Tommy should commit the crime himself instead of hiring someone. The two cousins discussed their murder plan via Facebook and SMS. Robert and Tommy had been considering it for a long time, but made the mistake of communicating online, leaving them with a lot of evidence against themselves. Their final plan was for Heather to steal her mother's credit card again to book Tommy's flight and a hotel room where Sheila would stay before leaving for Bali. Sheila wrote a letter to her friend, expressing her concerns about the trip and her daughter's behavior, feeling unsafe. Sheila's friend tried to convince her not to go, emphasizing that the trip would hardly heal their broken relationship. On August 11, 2014, Sheila and Heather arrived on the island after midnight when Sheila checked into their resort. She was surprised to find 2 rooms booked under her name. She approached the receptionist, who showed her a copy of Tommy's passport. This caused Sheila to confront her daughter, leading to a heated argument in the hotel lobby. Heather insisted that Tommy had come to study, but Sheila was skeptical. She felt that a high school dropout would be unlikely to come to Bali for educational purposes. Tommy arrived at the resort just hours after Heather and her mother. Heather texted Tommy to say that Sheila was still angry, but had eventually fallen asleep. Heather quietly left the room and went to Tommy's room. They walked together down the hotel hallway. Heather then returned to her room, and they exchanged text messages discussing how to deal with Sheila between 4 and 8 a.m. Heather and Tommy exchanged numerous text messages, in which it is believed that Heather had drugged her mother. In the messages, they mentioned that the drugs had not worked, causing Sheila to wake up. Tommy advised waiting at least 20 minutes to ensure Sheila would fall back asleep. The messages revealed that Heather was looking forward to the moment when she could kill her mother. Initially, Heather was supposed to carry out the murder, but she became frightened and asked Tommy for help. In the disturbing messages, Heather urged Tommy to stay strong. Tommy then contacted Robert, who was confused as to why Sheila had not died from the sleeping pills. Robert suggested drowning her, but Tommy informed him about the security cameras throughout the resort. Tommy and Heather decided that Tommy would use a heavy, blunt object to attack Sheila. Tommy showed Heather a picture of a glass fruit basket with a metal handle, and they agreed that they would use it as a weapon. The plan was for Tommy to sneak into the room and hit Sheila in the head, knocking her unconscious, so they could kill her together. After discussing the plan, Heather told her mother that she was going to get some water. Heather and Tommy went to Sheila's room, where they executed their plan. Tommy entered the room, closed the door, took a glass fruit basket, and smashed it over Sheila's head. He and Heather then attacked Sheila together until she stopped breathing. They stuffed her body into a suitcase, which they were later seen carrying on the hotel grounds at 10:20. Tommy texted Robert to confirm that Sheila was dead, stating that he felt no remorse or regret for his actions. Robert reassured him, saying that it was not his fault and that he should not feel ashamed because Sheila was a bad person. At 10:43, Heather and Tommy loaded their luggage and took it to the 6th floor. Security cameras recorded them carrying the suitcase along with other items from the room. They then called a taxi and loaded the bedsheets and suitcase into it. Just before leaving, they noticed that the suitcase was leaking blood. Heather and Tommy told the taxi driver that they needed to check out of the hotel and asked him to wait outside for them, but the couple quickly escaped through the fire exit after waiting for a while. The taxi driver noticed that Heather and Tommy had not returned, so he opened the trunk to retrieve the suitcase. At that moment, he noticed blood and immediately contacted security. Together, they took the suitcase to the police station. When they opened it, Everyone inside was horrified to discover Sheila's body. She had suffered serious injuries, mainly to her face, including a broken nose and jaw. The cause of death was asphyxiation. As the blow had broken her nose and blocked her airway, it did not take long to find Heather and Tommy. They were arrested the next day at another hotel less than a mile from the scene of the murder. The news reached Robert, who lived in the United States. When he saw the headlines about the arrest of Tommy and his girlfriend, he began texting friends in a panic, pretending to be shocked that Tommy had been jailed for murder. However, his earlier text messages with Tommy on the night of the murder showed that he was an accomplice. Initially, Heather and Tommy claimed that Sheila had been murdered by armed robbers, who then took the couple hostage. They said they had escaped, but were too scared to go to the police. However, after further questioning, Tommy changed his story, stating that he had killed Sheila in self-defense. He claimed that Sheila had reacted violently when they told her about the pregnancy. Heather supported this claim, saying that Sheila had been extremely violent during the confrontation. This contradicted police reports, which indicated that Heather had been aggressive in previous incidents with her mother. Heather also claimed that she was not present when Sheila was murdered. In Indonesia, the penalty for murder is death, a fate that Heather greatly dreaded. Her pregnancy helped her avoid the death penalty initially. The police were skeptical about her pregnancy, but after confirmation, she received some prison privileges. In April 2015, Lois Heather Mack was sentenced to 10 years in prison, while Tommy Schaefer received 18 years. Heather's sentence was reduced because she gave birth while in custody, and judges believed her involvement in the murder was less serious than Tommy's. A year later, Robert Bibbs was charged with conspiracy against Sheila. After a trial in June 2017, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison. During this time, Heather was able to use her cell phone and social media, where videos of her smoking and enjoying herself in prison went viral. Heather made a shocking confession video, which was later deleted, in which she claimed that her mother had killed her father, James Mack. She also accused Sheila of being violent towards her, but these allegations were denied by Heather's uncle and aunt. Furthermore, it was confirmed that there was no foul play in his death. Sheila never pressed criminal charges against her daughter. Despite the injuries she suffered over the years, Heather spent 2 years raising her daughter in prison before she was placed with a foster family. Heather only served 8 out of her 10 years in prison after being released. Heather did not want to return to Chicago due to safety concerns and planned to stay in Indonesia. However, she was extradited to the United States because neither she nor her daughter had a visa. Heather was arrested by U.S. authorities in November 2021 and held in federal prison. Her trial was scheduled for July 2023, but in June, she unexpectedly pleaded guilty to all charges on January 17, 2024. Welcome back. Detectives, let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Jennifer Loggden. Tommy Smith was a third-year student at a local college. His girlfriend, Jennifer Loggden, had just finished her first year at the same school before they met. Jennifer had been living in the dorms, but was bored with the constant partying. She wanted a quieter place to study when her longtime friend, Casey Johnson, decided to attend the same college. They saw a great opportunity to rent a house together. They all agreed on a small rental home in Peoria, Illinois, and pooled their money to make it work. Everything seemed fine until a hot summer day. On July 19, 1991, at that time, 20 years old, Tommy and his 19-year-old fiancée, Jennifer, were busy preparing for their wedding. They planned to start a family after finishing their education and securing jobs. They are enjoying the weekend. With Casey, the three of them had been living together for a while, getting along well and supporting each other. Tommy and Jennifer even intended to continue living in the house after their wedding. On the evening of July 19, 1991, Tommy, Jennifer, and Casey gathered to watch a movie together. They chose a horror film by Stephen King. They set up a mattress taken from the bedroom, prepared some snacks, and made themselves comfortable. It seemed like a typical evening, and no one could predict the nightmare that was about to unfold. After a while, Jennifer fell asleep, followed by Tommy, while Casey went to a different room to sleep in the middle of the night. Jennifer woke up to a terrifying scream coming from nearby. Feeling confused and bewildered in the darkness, she noticed Tommy fighting with a stranger. The attacker was a large black man with bloodshot eyes and a knife in his hand. Despite looking very intimidating, Tommy fought fiercely with the attacker, who struck him with many powerful blows. Obviously, this tall man was stronger and more aggressive than Tommy, but Tommy still fought back with all his might. Jennifer felt confused and helpless. She noticed something strange. The attacker had socks on his hands while his feet were bare. She realized that Tommy was losing strength, but she herself was unable to move due to shock and fear. Tommy was attacked in the chest and neck when Tommy collapsed. Jennifer knew that the attacker was going to continue. He aimed at her and attacked with the knife, desperately. Jennifer fought back with all her strength. At one point, she managed to overpower the attacker and take the knife from him, but she had already sustained serious injuries and could no longer fight. The knife slipped from her hand and fell to the floor. The attacker picked up the knife again and attacked her, quickly knocking her unconscious. At that moment, a conversation could be heard coming from the room where Casey was sleeping. Realizing the danger, Casey called 911 for help. Unfortunately, the connection was poor, or the operator was distracted. As they repeatedly asked for information, the attacker, hearing the commotion, became enraged. He seemed to want to kill her. He broke the lock and rushed into the room. Casey barely had time to finish her sentence and hung up on emergency services because he attacked her. Casey pleaded for her life, begging him not to hurt her. However, the assailant lunged at Casey, striking her in the face and chest. Despite her efforts to defend herself, she was overpowered by the attacker during the struggle. The knife blade became badly bent and eventually broke off from the handle, leaving the assailant without a weapon. By this time, Casey had already suffered several serious injuries, including to her throat. After the incident, the attacker picked up the broken blade and fled the scene. Fortunately, Casey managed to call the police. Officers arrived at the house around 3 a.m. Upon entering, they were met with a horrifying sight: items scattered and equipment damaged, indicating that a violent struggle had taken place. Amidst the chaos, they found Tommy lying unconscious on the floor, with multiple injuries. Despite his injuries, he bravely protected Jennifer and Casey. Fortunately, Jennifer and Casey were still alive and remained conscious for several minutes. After the police arrived, paramedics were on the scene. Attempting to save them, Jennifer seemed to be the most distressed. She expressed her fear of death and begged for help for Tommy and Casey. At that time, her boyfriend, Tommy, was unconscious, very pale, and had lost a lot of blood, but he was still breathing. Afterward, both Jennifer and Casey believed that they had survived the attack thanks to Tommy's brave actions. The attacker hit Tommy so hard that his knife bent and he lost much of his strength as a result. He was no longer able to inflict deep wounds, only superficial ones, however. Without immediate medical attention, both Jennifer and Casey would have died from blood loss. Fortunately, help arrived in time, and they were saved. They were taken to the hospital and placed in the intensive care unit. Their lives were very fragile. Tommy, however, was not as fortunate. He sustained the most severe injuries and bled to death. Passing away just after the paramedics arrived, his family was not surprised by his actions. They felt immense pride in him. Tommy was always selfless and loving, a true hero who protected Jennifer and Casey. Jennifer believed he would have made a wonderful husband and father, with a bright future ahead of him. Sadly, she never had the chance to experience that future. Investigators aimed to gather information about the attacker to begin their search. This individual was clearly dangerous and posed a threat to society, potentially targeting more victims at that very moment. Although the attacker was not masked, the darkness made it impossible for Casey and Jennifer to provide a detailed description. They could only say he was a strong black man, however. They did recall an important detail. He had socks on his hands and was barefoot. It appeared he had put on gloves just before the attack to avoid leaving fingerprints. But he did leave footprints, which could help identify him, given this information. The police concluded that the suspect likely lived nearby, as it would be difficult to walk long distances on asphalt without shoes. This insight helped the officers narrow down their list of potential suspects to those with prior assault convictions. One suspect was ruled out because he was already in custody for another crime. Another young man, known for violent offenses, had a solid alibi. That was confirmed. The police had only one suspect left to investigate: Jennifer's neighbor, Jean Brown, 27 years old, who lived across the street. When the police went to Jean's house to check, they found a blood stain on the mosquito netting of a window. Jean explained that the blood came from a cut he had sustained in the kitchen the night before. However, this explanation was not convincing and made him the prime suspect. He was taken to the police station for questioning. Meanwhile, the forensic scientist was investigating the crime scene for evidence and found several important clues. One clue was an invitation to a party that Jennifer, Tommy, and Casey were planning for the following weekend. It had fallen to the floor during the struggle. They also found human footprints on the ground. These footprints indicated that the attacker was barefoot, which could lead to valuable clues upon comparison. It was determined that the footprint matched Jean Brown's. Additionally, forensic experts discovered tiny drops of blood in his hair. Jean understood that he was facing serious charges that could result in severe penalties. The investigators were pressuring him and encouraging him to confess so that he could receive a lighter sentence. Eventually, Jean began to share his version of events. He claimed that he only intended to confront Tommy, but when Tommy resisted, he lost control. Jean noticed that Jennifer had woken up, and, in a panic, he attacked her as well. Hearing a noise from Casey's room, he thought his only option to avoid arrest was to eliminate everyone in the house. However, he could not explain why he attacked them. The police were actively gathering evidence, confirming that Jean had broken into the house at night with the intention of stealing money and purchasing banned substances, a claim he later made in order not to leave fingerprints. He wore socks on his hands. However, he did not know that footprints were as distinctive as fingerprints. If he had realized this, he might have worn socks on his feet too. His testimony sounds like a detective story, but in reality, it is very unconvincing. Using a knife to try to steal just a few dollars seems absurd. The choice of a house where 3 unemployed students live together may seem strange. What was his plan? How could he buy banned substances without a strategy? These questions didn't align with the overall situation, and it seemed unimaginable that a small robbery could end with 3 people being brutally harmed. In this situation, investigators suspect that Jean's real targets were Casey and Jennifer. He may have wanted to abuse them. Perhaps that was the reason he attacked Tommy first. To eliminate the main threat to his plan, it appears Jean underestimated Tommy's resistance. After dealing with Tommy, he noticed that Jennifer had woken up and that Casey was already calling for emergency help. At that moment, Jean's plan began to fail. In a hurry, he turned his attention to Casey and Jennifer, believing he had already killed Tommy and Jennifer. He quickly tried to attack Casey, grabbed her purse, and fled with a broken knife. The investigation revealed that Tommy was the one who managed to wear out Jean during a prolonged struggle, although he fought bravely. Tommy sustained severe injuries. Casey played a crucial role in the fight. She managed to bend the knife blade and even knocked it out of Jean's hand. After that, the knife became more difficult to wield. Jennifer also suffered injuries, making her one of the most affected individuals alongside Tommy. Jennifer spent a significant amount of time in the intensive care unit, teetering between life and death, in addition to several stab wounds. She had a punctured lung. Fortunately, both she and Casey miraculously survived. Despite doctors' warning that they were extremely close to death, however. They continued to deal with the aftermath of the traumatic experience. One troubling aspect of the investigation was the apparent indifference of the neighbors. They lived in a quiet suburban area, known for its low crime rate, where there is almost no noise at night. Casey, Tommy, and Jennifer cried out for help, but local residents reported that no one heard their screams, not even the nearby neighbors. This silence allowed Jean to leave the scene of the crime and return home without being noticed. If Casey hadn't managed to call for help, she and Jennifer would have bled to death without any chance of survival. Casey was the youngest person present during the attack, only 17 years old. Despite this, she fought back bravely, suffering many injuries in the process. After that, Jean took his crime knife before running away, leaving Casey behind because she pretended to be dead. What ultimately saved her was a call to emergency services. It is hard to imagine the horrors that would have befallen Casey, and Jennifer had Casey not successfully called for help. At this point, the 911 dispatcher's response raised many concerns, and the public was outraged by his slow reaction due to a poor connection or lack of experience. He had difficulty responding quickly. He repeatedly asked for clarification, revealing his uncertainty. This delay was significant, and a quicker response might have saved Tommy. During the subsequent interrogation, Jean provided more details about that tragic night. He claimed that he had been at home all day and that he was using banned substances, with his last use occurring just before dinner with his family. Then, when he ran out of banned substances, he decided to rob two young neighbors, Casey and Jennifer. For some reason, he was unaware that Tommy lived there permanently and that they had no money. It seemed that he had not planned the crime. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision. Jean was looking for an easy way to get money through theft so he could buy more banned substances. Jean had invaded their home with extreme brutality, shocking the community once again. The incident drew attention, particularly because it involved Jean, an African American, and banned substances. It was a senseless attack on young, promising individuals. Detectives suggested that the motives behind this aggression could include financial gain, a need for intimacy, and possibly envy and hatred towards more successful individuals, specifically attractive young women like Casey and Jennifer. It seemed he aimed to destroy something beautiful. The robbery appeared to be a tactic to lessen his culpability and secure a lighter sentence. However, these were empty justifications, given that the victims included the deceased Tommy and two seriously injured girls, Casey and Jennifer. Consequently, Jean faced charges of attempted murder and first-degree murder at the time of his arrest. He was married and had a son. His family was shocked that he chose a life of crime and banned substances instead of a normal life, ultimately severing ties with him nonetheless. They weren't entirely surprised by the incident. This was not his first crime. He had previously committed robberies and engaged with banned substances. However, his earlier criminal behavior had not been as brutally violent due to the overwhelming evidence and Jean's confession. Investigators quickly secured a search warrant for his house. In his room, they found physical evidence. He had not managed to dispose of the items. Forensic experts discovered that these items were soaked in blood. DNA testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Tommy, Casey, and Jennifer. However, by that time, Jean began to retract his statements. He claimed that he was cut by broken glass while taking out the trash in the evening, causing injuries to his arms and legs. To challenge Jean's account, special tests were conducted. It is common for criminals to injure themselves during knife attacks, particularly when the knife strikes a hard surface like a bone. This can cause the hand to slip onto the blade. Jean had cuts that matched the typical injuries seen in such cases. His hands and the knife were covered in blood, and he often displayed aggressive behavior. But at that moment, he was so enraged that he did not feel pain, given that Jean was a suspect from the beginning of the investigation and that sufficient evidence was found against him. Resisting was futile. in addition to the items found in his room. They also discovered a deformed knife blade from a pen that he had taken with him. The strongest evidence against Gene was microscopic blood droplets from Tommy found in his hair. This evidence provided enough reason to file charges. He was arrested just hours after the massacre, leaving him no time to dispose of the evidence. At that time, the crime was punishable by death, a penalty that was abolished in 2011. The defense attorney began to build a case, claiming that Gene was insane, arguing that he was unaware of his actions. They pointed to the fact that he did not attempt to destroy any evidence, as the murder knife was discovered in his home, along with other incriminating documents. Additionally, the attorney noted that Gene did not wash off the blood or change his clothes, which could indicate that he was not in a sober state. They also highlighted the numerous cuts on his hands as further evidence of his mental state. The attorney even considered arguing that Gene had attempted to end his life throughout the process. The defense aimed to portray Gene in a more sympathetic light to lessen his punishment. Gene supported this narrative by claiming that he could not remember parts of the attack and attributing his actions to intoxication and the use of a banned substance. The prosecutor's office stated that this violent attack was carried out with extreme cruelty. Gene's actions showed no signs of emotional distress or insanity. He broke into a house and attacked 3 young people, Tommy, Casey, and Jennifer, who posed no threat to him. His actions were completely unjustified. The prosecutor's office also noted that robbery was a factor in the attack, which is indirectly supported by the small amount of stolen items. Gene could have taken more valuable possessions, but only grabbed Casey's purse, which had little money in it, as he fled. Furthermore, they believe Gene targeted the house primarily because he had malicious intentions toward Casey and Jennifer, with Tommy being the main obstacle. However, Gene's testimony changed several times. Leading up to the trial, he eventually claimed that he did not attack Tommy with a knife. Unexpectedly, he stated that Tommy was the one who grabbed the knife and used it against him. Gene insisted that he overpowered Tommy and took the knife during their struggle. He later fell into a state of emotional distress. Furthermore, Gene denied any intention to rob, claiming he had no idea how he ended up in their house. He attributed his confusion to his unstable mental state during the altercation. A knife handle was discovered at the scene. It seems Gene lost it during the struggle, and since he was fleeing in the dark, he didn't have time to retrieve it, leaving his fingerprints on it. At that moment, Tommy was not involved with the knife. Gene's actions suggested that his intentions were more malicious than he claimed. He didn't wear a mask and appeared unconcerned about being recognized, likely because he didn't expect anyone else to be in the house. If his goal was merely to steal money, there would have been no reason for him to attack them. Gene confronted Tommy while he was asleep, and there was no indication that Tommy had noticed him or attempted to fight him off. During the trial, a statement from one of the detectives sparked controversy. He praised Tommy for his bravery in confronting Gene, which he claimed saved the lives of Casey and Jennifer. However, this account contradicted the widely accepted version of the incident. According to the detective, Tommy had tried to detain Gene, engaged in a struggle, and attempted to hold him down until the police arrived. Yet, there was no evidence to support this claim. Moreover, even if Tommy had tried, it clearly failed, as Gene managed to injure Casey and Jennifer and escape. Eventually, this version of the incident was dismissed. Surprisingly, Tommy's mother chose not to pursue the death penalty for Gene. Despite having lost her only son, she found the idea of Gene's mother grieving over her child's coffin because of her decision unbearable. Although Gene attempted to show remorse, the jury did not believe him. To avoid the death penalty, he struck a deal with the prosecution. He expressed regret for killing Tommy Smith and stated that he would rather end his life than have caused this pain. He mentioned that if he had known that the banned substance would lead to this, he would never have used it. By pleading guilty to murder and attempted double murder, Gene avoided execution. He was sentenced to life in prison for Tommy's murder. along with an additional 30 years for each of the attacks on Casey and Jennifer, and 15 years for burglary. Jean was incarcerated on January 16, 1992, after the verdict. The lawyer submitted several appeals, suggesting there might be a change in the case. However, these claims were quickly dismissed due to the overwhelming evidence against Jean. He is currently serving his sentence at the Illinois Correctional Center. Casey and Jennifer are still recovering from the incident. They will always carry scars from the injuries inflicted by Jean. The emotional trauma was even more severe. Jennifer struggled for a long time to cope with Tommy's death, but eventually, she found a way to move forward, despite Jean's apologies. Casey and Jennifer could never accept them. They believed that the only appropriate punishment for Jean was execution, as he could not make amends for the harm he caused by killing Tommy, Casey, and Jennifer, who miraculously survived this senseless act of violence. Vowed to prevent any attempts by Jean to gain release from prison, given the seriousness of his crimes. It is unlikely that he will ever leave prison after the incident. His wife distanced herself from him, significantly limiting his contact with their child. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore, the case of Melanie Walner. On June 9, 2009, a woman who owned a house where a couple had previously lived was cleaning and preparing the place for new tenants after the former residents had moved out. She attempted to give the large wheelie bins to the garbage men, but they refused to empty them because they were too heavy and smelled bad. The bins were overflowing, and she had no idea what was inside. She and her husband struggled to lift the bins as the garbage men requested, so they took some of the contents out themselves to make it easier for disposal during the next collection. Inside the bins, they discovered a pile of trash along with several tightly sealed black plastic bags. When they cleared away some of the debris, they found what looked like human legs infested with insects. The homeowner panicked and immediately called the police to report the incident. When the police arrived, they found human remains in a wheelie bin. Those unfamiliar with crime and the smell of decomposing bodies mistook it for spoiled food, but seasoned officers quickly recognized the distinctive odor. The situation was made worse by the hot weather. The remains were in poor condition and were found inside a sleeping bag before forensic experts arrived to examine the scene and collect evidence. The bin was examined both inside and outside, resulting in the collection of several fingerprints. The police focused closely on the area around and inside the house. Despite hours of searching, they found no suspicious signs, no evidence of violence, no struggle, no robbery, and no traces that could indicate an assault or murder. The police needed to quickly identify the deceased, as this could provide new clues. They were unsure whether the victim had any connection to the house. The dumpster was located next to the house on Hamilton Avenue, raising the possibility that the body had been placed there on purpose to throw the investigation off track. The police investigated the previous occupants of the house. The last occupant was a man named Peter Walner, who had lived alone since his wife died 3 years earlier. His wife, Melanie Walner, was 30 when she passed away. After examining dental records, it was confirmed that the body found by the medical examiner was indeed Melanie. It is unclear how her body came to be there, as Melanie had disappeared in 2006. When asked about it, Peter burst into tears and explained that his wife had died suddenly in late summer from a brain aneurysm. This raised a puzzling question. How did her body end up in the dumpster 3 years later? The owner of the house was sure that Melanie's body was buried or cremated at the time of her death. Melanie was 30 years old. The heroine of the story was from South Africa, where she was born and raised. She was described as bright and cheerful, but around the age of 1996, she decided to move to the UK. It is difficult to imagine how large-scale this change was in the girl's life, but she dreamed of building a career and understood that in Africa, there were no such prospects. From a young age, She dreamed of England and also wanted to open her own business, but first, after moving, she immediately got a job in a fast food chain to provide for herself. After a while, she was noticed, and the girl was promoted to manager of the establishment. It was during this period that she met her future husband, named Peter Walner. Peter was an immigrant from Germany who also lived and worked in the UK. He and Melanie started dating in 2001. After a while, they decided to get married, and Melanie took her husband's last name. The couple rented a house on Hamilton Avenue, and both quickly found jobs at a local restaurant in a prestigious hotel. Peter worked as a chef, while Melanie worked as a waitress. Their friends, acquaintances, and neighbors knew them as a friendly and sociable couple. They rarely argued and were always polite. Melanie often expressed her love for her husband and her desire to have children when she was more settled. It seemed that things were going well for them. However, in 2006, their situation changed dramatically. In early September, Melanie's friends and family were informed that she had died suddenly from a brain aneurysm without warning. She had never complained of health problems and rarely went to the hospital. Peter informed her family of her death and promptly returned her ashes to them. No one knew the details of her death. To back up his story, he showed Melanie's relatives a death certificate, and they accepted his account. This information was confirmed by several others. In June 2009, Melanie's body was discovered in a trash bin, raising serious concerns about the circumstances surrounding her death. It was clear that Melanie had been murdered. Her death did not appear to be a suicide or an accident. The police quickly focused on Peter, the prime suspect in the case. He seemed to be hiding information, especially when he lied about his wife's death being due to illness. However, the police were unable to locate his new address. They traced his journey to a hotel where he had stayed after moving, but he was not there when they arrived. A search of his hotel room yielded no useful evidence, and the hotel manager could not recall anything unusual about Peter's stay, noting that he had only stayed one night before leaving the next morning. Forensic experts are working to determine what happened to Melanie and where her body had been for the past 3 years. If she had really been dead for that long, her body could not have been in the trash all that time. It must have been placed there recently. While investigating Melanie's background, the police discovered evidence of a history of deception by Peter, who had shown Melanie's family a photo of a supposedly fake death certificate. His involvement in the case became increasingly clear, making it necessary to arrest him. A forensic expert took over the case and quickly noticed that the body had been frozen before being placed in the dumpster. Another important question arose for the medical examiner when he took a closer look at Melanie's skull. He discovered a severe blow to the head, which had been caused by a blunt object. The forensic expert pointed out that if she had not received immediate medical attention after such a serious injury, she would have died about half an hour later. The evidence clearly showed that Melanie had been murdered. In order to uncover the details surrounding her death, it was necessary to speak to Peter, who was still missing. During the investigation, the police focused on the addresses where the couple had lived during their marriage and after Melanie's death. They sought information from neighbors and acquaintances who could provide insight into recent events in their lives. During the investigation, officers met with a local shop owner who said he knew Peter well, as Peter used to shop there almost every day. However, Peter had stopped coming to the shop a few weeks prior. The shop owner had heard rumors that Peter might be going abroad, possibly to visit family in Germany, but he had no specific details. The shop owner shared that, before moving out of his house on Hamilton Avenue, Peter had offered to sell him his old freezer. Peter mentioned that he no longer needed it, and the shop owner agreed to buy it for $20. The low price was due to the fact that the freezer had a very strong smell, which the shop owner could not figure out how to fix, and he subsequently gave it to his brother. This led the police to believe they were on the right track, as it was likely that the freezer had kept Melanie's body frozen for so many years. Police also spoke to the store owner's brother, who had stopped using the freezer because of the smell. Unsure of the source of the odor, he set the freezer aside without further investigation. While forensic experts did not find anything suspicious inside the house, police did discover a mattress that was almost completely covered in blue paint. The mattress was removed for analysis, and, as expected, a large amount of blood was found underneath the paint. DNA testing confirmed that the blood matched the profile of the murdered Melanie Walner, indicating that this was where she had been killed. Pieces of plastic were found in the shed, and testing confirmed that they originated from a freezer that had been sold. Additionally, old red stains on the pieces were identified as Melanie's blood. This evidence indicated that her body had been kept in a freezer for 3 years before being discarded in the trash. Despite the information gathered, the investigation was unable to determine when the murder occurred, the motive behind the attack, or the specifics of the incident. Police contacted Melanie's family in South Africa. After her death, they received her belongings, including her diary. Upon examining them, police discovered that the couple's marriage had been deteriorating in the days leading up to her death. Melanie found out that Peter was having an affair with a woman who worked at the same hotel where they both were employed. After discovering this, she confronted Peter and told him that she knew about the affair. Peter was upset and assured her that it would never happen again. She chose to forgive him and give their marriage another chance. In her diary, she expressed her deep love for her husband and her determination to save their family and their relationship. Melanie even considered quitting her job. She believed that Peter's infidelity might have stemmed from their deep attachment to each other, as they spent every moment together without any privacy. However, Peter remained unchanged. One of the last entries in Melanie's diary revealed that she had once again caught her husband being unfaithful. The police believe this may have led to an escalation of conflict, prompting Peter to kill her. The police contacted Melanie's family for more information. They learned that the last time anyone had spoken to Melanie was on August 27, 2006. Several friends confirmed that they had had dinner with her that evening. This encounter provided important evidence, as Melanie had used her bank card to pay at a Chinese restaurant. This information helped clarify the timeline. No one saw her again after that evening, and in early September, her husband Peter announced that she had died of a brain aneurysm. A forensic pathologist examined Melanie's stomach and found undigested food from the Chinese restaurant where she had last dined with friends. This suggested that she had died just hours after their encounter, on the night of August 28, 2006. Neighbors from the house on Hamilton Avenue revealed that Peter had rented a truck to move various belongings. They quickly obtained the license plate number by contacting the moving company, allowing the police to track the truck's movements. The police began monitoring city surveillance cameras in an attempt to find the fugitive. They tracked the truck's last payment, which showed that Peter had used it about 2 weeks before the investigation began, with a stop at the port of Dover. Unfortunately, this is where the trail went cold, prompting the police to seek the public's help. They hoped that someone might recognize Peter from a photo alert. Surprisingly, it was Peter who contacted the police, expressing shock at the unusual circumstances surrounding his wife's body. He insisted he had nothing to do with it and claimed he was on holiday in Malta with his new girlfriend. The police invited him back to discuss the events surrounding his wife's death to determine whether he could be cleared of the charges. He agreed to return. Upon arriving in the UK, Peter, 30, was arrested and taken to a police station. His questioning began on June 11, 2009. Peter soon admitted that he was responsible for his wife's death, but claimed that he had acted in self-defense. According to Peter, on August 27, 2006, he had an argument with his wife, Melanie, about the state of their home. The argument escalated when Melanie became emotional and punched him in the face. She then grabbed a rolling pin from the kitchen and lunged at him, causing Peter to punch her to the ground. Peter then tried to leave, but suddenly, Melanie stabbed him 3 times in the leg. To prove his story, he showed everyone the scar on his leg. Peter felt scared, shocked, and in pain. Fearing for his life, he picked up a large frying pan and hit Melanie in the face several times with the edge of the pan. She collapsed and lost consciousness. Peter insisted that it was all an accident. Panicked, Peter decided not to call the police. Instead, he bought a large freezer and placed it in the shed, where he hid Melanie's body. Over the next few days, he cleaned out the house to erase any evidence of the fight. He then contacted Melanie's family in South Africa and lied that his young wife had suddenly died. Melanie's mother came to England to support Peter and to collect her belongings and ashes. Peter burned a large amount of old wood and boards to create ashes, which he then hid in an urn along with an engraved wedding ring. He subsequently gave the urn to Melanie's mother. Melanie's family held a memorial service, and Peter was present, appearing distraught as he delivered an emotional speech about the loss of his wife. Melanie's mother and family were shocked when they learned the truth about how she had died. Peter claimed that his actions were in self-defense and admitted to manslaughter. Meanwhile, the police reopened the case and re-evaluated the circumstances surrounding Melanie's death. They suspected that she had been beaten to death while she slept. Furthermore, a forensic expert found inconsistencies in Peter's testimony. In addition to the wound on Melanie's face, which appeared to have been inflicted with a frying pan, there was also a knife wound that Peter failed to mention. Peter could not explain how the scar on his leg had occurred, and no medical records were found to clarify this. It is possible that he inflicted the wounds on himself to cover something up. Peter later changed his story, claiming that Melanie had just woken up and left the room with a mask on, which she pulled up to her forehead before the argument began. Peter chose not to remove the mask and pulled it down to cover her face. Despite the evidence against him, Peter maintained that the crime was committed in self-defense. However, as the police presented more evidence, his demeanor changed. He became increasingly anxious and aggressive, attempting to create new justifications for the findings. The motive for the crime remains unclear, but it is suspected to be related to Peter's infidelity and a love triangle. Over time, more evidence has emerged to support this theory. Some police officers traveled to Malta to collect new clues, as Peter had been living there for several weeks. They hoped to find evidence relevant to the investigation. In the house where Peter lived with his new girlfriend, they discovered a large box filled with souvenirs and other documents, indicating that Peter was very organized. Among these items was a fake death certificate for Melanie. The police then examined phone records, letters, and other digital information. This evidence confirmed that shortly before the tragedy, Melanie had discovered her husband's infidelity, which matched the entries in her diary. Peter's new girlfriend was a colleague at the hotel. The day after the tragedy, August 28, 2006, which was also Peter's birthday, he went on a date with new girlfriend. They returned to Peter's house and spent the night there, in the same bed where Melanie had been murdered just the day before. When confronted about this, Peter denied everything and offered numerous excuses, but it was clear that he was lying. Peter went on trial in May 2010. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter and obstruction of justice. While Peter maintained that he acted in self-defense, the evidence presented by the police and the prosecution was compelling. The prosecution argued that Peter had acted intentionally. They believed that Peter wanted to continue his relationship with his new girlfriend and saw Melanie as an obstacle. The prosecution contended that murder was unnecessary. Peter could have simply ended his marriage since they had no children and no assets to divide. The couple did not have any insurance, which ruled out any financial motive. Peter soon broke up with his co-worker and began dating other women while pretending to be a grieving widower. One of his girlfriends had a daughter with him and later recounted their relationship in court. She explained that when Peter found out she was pregnant, he was initially confused but agreed to support her decision to keep the baby, promising to be there for her. However, he left for Germany shortly afterward, claiming that his father had died and he needed help with the funeral. He stayed to support his grieving mother, later telling his girlfriend that his mother had also died of a stroke and that he needed to arrange another funeral. He frequently disappeared for periods of time. When he reappeared, he said he had been in the hospital with kidney problems, although she had seen him around town. She later gave birth and raised the child alone. She discovered that Peter had been lying to her the entire time. He was a pathological liar. However, she never believed that he was capable of murder and was shocked to learn what he had done to his wife. The prosecution reconstructed the events of that tragic day, August 27, 2006. Melanie returned home from dinner with friends at a Chinese restaurant and went to bed. At that moment, Peter saw an opportunity to get rid of his troublesome wife. He wanted to ensure she was defenseless, so he picked up the heaviest frying pan in the kitchen. He smashed the pan into his sleeping wife's face several times, knocking her unconscious and fatally injuring her. For 3 years, Melanie's body was hidden in a freezer in the shed. When Peter finally decided to leave his Hamilton Avenue home, he planned to go to Malta with a new girlfriend. However, Peter faced a problem. He needed to dispose of Melanie's body to avoid arrest. He decided to put her body in a sleeping bag outside. He wrapped it in cling film and placed it at the bottom of a wheelie bin, covering it with black bin bags. Peter asked his neighbor to move the bin outside before the rubbish collectors arrived. The neighbor agreed and pushed the bin out of the way. Noticing that it was unusually heavy, the cleaners refused to move an overloaded bin. Had everything gone according to plan, Melanie's body would have been dumped in a landfill, allowing him to escape detection. Fortunately, her body was discovered. He even sold the freezer in which Melanie's body had been stored for 3 years. This decision was a serious mistake, as it gave the police access to vital evidence. The defense made several attempts to substantiate Peter's claim of self-defense, but his account appeared implausible. Following the trial, Peter Walner was convicted of murdering Melanie Walner and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Hello everyone. Today, we will learn about another case. The case of Zachary Davis. Zachary Everett Davis was 15 years old when he committed a particularly cold-blooded and senseless murder. Just a couple of years later, he gained notoriety on the internet after a chilling interview with Dr. Phil McGraw. In that interview, he details the murder, what he felt, and what was going on in his mind. The Davis family lived in Hendersonville, Tennessee. The family included Chris, the father, Melanie, the mother, and their 2 sons, Josh and Zachary, who were just a year apart in age. This close age made them more like best friends than typical brothers, as they spent a lot of time together playing and hanging out. Overall, the Davis family appeared to be happy and normal, except for Zachary, the younger son, who was a challenging child. He was quiet, shy, and emotionally distant, often displaying obsessive behaviors due to his sadness. Then, as Zachary grew a bit older, some strange symptoms began to manifest, and it became clear that he was suffering from a mental illness. This situation was a significant challenge for both Zachary and his family, but they persevered and sought help from various specialists. In 2009, Chris Davis, the father of the family, passed away from motor neuron disease, also known as ALS. This degenerative condition affects muscle control, leading to a gradual loss of movement over time. Individuals with ALS often become unable to walk and may need a wheelchair. The disease also impacts speech, making it slurred and difficult to understand, and in some cases, it can completely rob patients of their ability to speak. Witnessing a loved one endure this painful decline is incredibly challenging, unfortunately. The Davis family underwent this firsthand as they watched Chris decline until his death. This experience deeply affected the entire family, especially Zachary, who was very close to his father. After his father's passing, Zachary's behavior changed significantly. He became withdrawn and fell into depression. His mental health worsened, making daily life a struggle. He was hospitalized multiple times. He was diagnosed with early-onset schizophrenia and depression stemming from his loss. A psychotherapist was assigned to him, and Zachary attended 4 therapy sessions before he stopped going, since he was only 12 at the time. His mother, Melanie, took him to the appointments for reasons unknown. She eventually decided to discontinue the therapy sessions and instead began taking him to a doctor. Whether Zachary resisted therapy or his mother was too busy, he ultimately received no support for his mental health issues despite his challenges. Zachary made an effort to lead a normal life. He attended school, but he rarely interacted with anyone there. While he went to class, his classmates found him odd because he never initiated conversations. For instance, if someone smiled at him, he wouldn't smile back. He would simply look away. He only spoke when absolutely necessary, such as when a teacher addressed him or when an important question was asked. When he did talk, his voice was very soft, almost a whisper. As if he were hesitant to join the conversation, Zachary had no friends. Likely because he did not enjoy socializing or meeting new people, his only close companion was his older brother, Josh. They played and spent a lot of time together before their father's death. After Chris's death, Zachary became withdrawn and seemed to prefer that state. His classmates noticed that he wore the same hoodie every day and often kept the hood up when he was outside, which displayed unusual behavior, unlike his brother. Josh, who was active, participated in sports, had many friends, and frequently attended parties. Zachary chose to isolate himself in his bedroom. He showed little interest in going outside or engaging in a lively, varied life. He did enjoy reading and watching movies, especially horror films, which were his favorite genre. He also had a fascination with true crime documentaries and became overly engrossed in real-life criminal cases, sometimes idolizing the criminals. This interest was unhealthy. While watching crime films, Zachary exhibited no empathy for the victims and instead became captivated by the killers. Viewing them as role models, he kept multiple notebooks because he loved to write and draw. One of these notebooks was always with him and served as a diary where he recorded his feelings and daily experiences. When Zachary turned 14, he told his mother that he had started hearing voices. Specifically, there was one voice he heard every night that caused him so much stress he could hardly sleep. This voice belonged to his deceased father and said many distressing things. Concerned, Melanie took Zachary to a psychiatrist. Unfortunately, his condition only worsened initially. Zachary only heard the voice at night when he was trying to sleep, but eventually it began to occur all the time, and he found himself constantly talking to it over the next few years. Zachary's mental health continued to decline, and he did not receive adequate support, although he had a diagnosis. He did not attend regular therapy sessions and likely wasn't on any medication after the loss of Chris. Melanie tried to balance work and household responsibilities while spending quality time with her sons. She worked hard to create a sense of normalcy in their lives by organizing family activities and planning fun outings. On August 10, 2012, Melanie took her sons to the movies, and they all had a wonderful time. After the movie, they returned home late and went to bed, however. Zachary had different plans for the night. He packed a backpack with notepads, pens, a toothbrush, a change of clothes, a ski mask, gloves, a hammer, and a knife. He then zipped up the backpack and went to the garage to retrieve a heavy sledgehammer that the family kept there. Around 11 p.m., Zachary picked up the sledgehammer and walked to his mother's bedroom. He paused at the door. Looking at his mother was asleep with the lights off. In that moment, he felt completely clear-headed. He approached her, lifted the sledgehammer, and began to strike her repeatedly with all his strength. He did this with such brute force that her blood splashed all over the room. The force of the blows caved in his mother's skull. Zachary recounted that his mother regained consciousness after the first or second blow, but she couldn't speak. Instead, she started to have convulsions during this time. Her eyes were open, and Zachary glanced into her eyes while he struck her with the sledgehammer, even though his mother was looking at him. She was unaware of her surroundings or what was occurring. Zachary admitted that throughout the violent attack on his mother, he was laughing, describing it as joyful laughter. 15-year-old Zachary brutally killed his mother in just a few minutes, however. He had more planned. His older brother, Josh, who was 16 at the time, was asleep in his bedroom after killing their mother. Zachary went downstairs with a bloody sledgehammer, leaving a trail of blood in the hallway before leaving the weapon in the laundry room. There are conflicting reports about what he did next. Some say he took gasoline, while others claim he grabbed whiskey or another flammable liquid. Zachary then returned to his mother's bedroom and began pouring the liquid everywhere. He also soaked the game room upstairs with the flammable liquid, after setting fires in both rooms. He took a pre-packed backpack and left, allowing the house to burn along with his mother's body and his still-living brother. Zachary's plan went horribly wrong. He wanted the house fire to destroy any evidence of his crime and to eliminate his brother. However, he made a critical error by setting the fires in 2 rooms and then closing the doors. This restricted the fire's spread, causing the smoke alarms to activate immediately. The noise of the alarms woke Josh. He jumped out of bed and rushed to his mother's bedroom. When he opened the door, he was met with a horrifying sight: his mother lying on the bed, covered in blood. In that moment, Josh realized he couldn't save her. She was already dead. Frantic, he ran out of the house to a neighbor's home and called 911. It's hard to fathom what must have been racing through Josh's mind. Everything unfolded so quickly. He woke to the fire alarm, discovered the blaze, and rushed to help his mother, only to find her lifeless body. The sequence of events unfolded rapidly, demonstrating how effectively the brain processes such situations. Emergency services arrived at the scene and extinguished the fire. Unfortunately, Melanie Davis was declared dead on sight, and the police began questioning Josh about what had happened. He immediately informed them that his younger brother, Zachary, who was gravely ill, was missing. Zachary had not been in the house during the fire, prompting the police to issue a missing persons report for him. This information was dispatched to all local police officers, and search teams quickly began their efforts. Knowing that Zachary could not have wandered far, he was located the following morning. About 10 miles from home, the police concluded that as soon as he left the house, he just kept walking, stopping occasionally to make entries in his notebook. When found, Zachary was covered in blood and was still wearing the same clothes in which he had killed his mother, although he had a change of clothes in his bag. It's unclear why he didn't use them. This aided the search, since the police recognized him immediately. They knew he was the suspect and arrested him, taking him to the police station. There, Zachary Davis confessed to murdering his mother and believed his brother had died in the house fire. He intended to kill both his brother and mother, leaving home under the belief that his plan had completely succeeded. During the police interrogation, Zachary was cooperative, providing all the required information and answering every question. However, he showed no signs of guilt or remorse. He appeared cold and indifferent when recounting his actions. He spoke in a way that suggested he felt no emotions whatsoever. When investigators asked Zachary why he committed the act, he stated that he believed his mother deserved to die because she was not a good mother. He felt she had not properly cared for him and his brothers. Zachary said that she made him and his brother do everything around the house, including washing and cooking. He also said that they essentially had to raise themselves, which likely started around the time their father died. Zachary thought it would be futile to communicate his feelings to her. He believed that bringing up his concerns, expressing himself, or attempting to change her behavior would be pointless because he thought she would not listen. As a result, he believed His only solution was to kill her, however. This was not the only reason for the murder. Zachary also experienced distress because he heard the voice of his deceased father every night, which prevented him from sleeping. This voice communicated dreadful things to him. The voice Zachary heard primarily spoke about his mother, Melanie, claiming she was bad and deserved to die. This is what the voice, which Zachary believed to be his father's, conveyed to him, leading him to think that Melanie should die. When the police asked Zachary how long he had been hearing these voices, he said they had been in his head for a long time. Zachary admitted he hadn't planned it for long. He had the idea and organized everything on the same day. Carrying it out just a few hours later, he may have even decided to do it before they went to the movies, despite claiming that the idea was spontaneous. Zachary's resentment towards his mother had been building up for quite a while. Zachary explained in his interview with Dr. Phil McGraw that he chose the day of the incident because he was free and saw it as a good opportunity to act. During the interview, Dr. Phil asked Zachary what it sounded like when he struck his mother with a hammer. And in a chilling moment, Zachary smiled and described the sound as a wet, dull thud. He laughed several times throughout the conversation. Dr. Phil remarked that such laughter is often a sign of nervousness rather than malicious enjoyment. Regardless, Zachary's laughter came across as unsettling. He claimed to love his mother. Though his sincerity was questionable, he acknowledged that they were not close and rarely communicated. Yet there was no animosity between them. The case shocking not only to the public, but also to those who knew the Davis family. While many were aware that Zachary struggled with mental illness, no one expected him to commit such an act against his mother. Zachary also mentioned that he never truly argued with his mother. Instead, he preferred to withdraw during conflicts. So why did he label her a bad mother if there was no real tension? According to him, their mother simply stopped being a mother to them, however. His relationship with his older brother Josh was even worse than his relationship with his mother. Although very few knew about this from the outside, they seemed like best friends during his teenage years. Zachary claimed that Josh abused him severely, even while their mother was at home. It's important to note that Josh was never charged or convicted of any crime, and Josh firmly denies these allegations. He defended himself during a hearing when Zachary's claims were brought up in court as a reason for Zachary's desire to harm him. In court, Josh reiterated that these incidents never occurred. No evidence supports these claims, but it would be challenging to find proof, even if they were true. Zachary claims that this incident significantly influenced his decision to kill his mother. He felt anger towards Melanie. Believing she should have protected him, he felt let down by her because she was in the house when Josh harmed him, but did nothing to intervene. She didn't even notice. It seemed to Zachary that she didn't care, and he allegedly tried to tell his mother what Josh had done. But she didn't want to hear it. Zachary wrote in his diary that she wouldn't listen to him and that she never believed him. She got angry every time he brought up the subject. She yelled at him, saying he was lying. This was one of the few topics they argued about. As they generally did not have many disagreements or conflicts within the family, Zachary revealed that the violence he experienced deeply affected him. Following the incident, he refrained from bathing for several weeks because the bathroom lacked a lock, and he was afraid his brother might break in while he was vulnerable. This led to him smelling very unpleasantly, which further fueled his anger towards his mother. It is hard to believe that a mother wouldn't notice their child had stopped showering, yet Melanie never mentioned this to Zachary. As a result, Zachary began to harm himself, which was the most severe sign of his illness. He expressed thoughts of wanting to kill his mother with a sledgehammer, wishing for her to die a painful death rather than peacefully in her sleep. He fantasized about starting a fire while Josh was still in the house, so that Josh would wake up in panic as the flames approached him. Wanting him to suffer, however, things didn't unfold as Zachary had envisioned, and Josh survived now. Reflecting on these events, Zachary regrets not having followed through with his plan to ensure his brother was dead before leaving the house. Many believe that Zachary was not mentally fit to stand trial. but he was ultimately deemed competent, and the trial proceeded, although he was only 15 years old at the time of the crime. He was tried as an adult. Zachary's defense team presented several factors that may have influenced his actions. They highlighted the death of his father, the voices he claimed to hear from his father, the violence inflicted by his brother, and the alleged neglect he suffered from their mother, Melanie. These were presented as reasons for Zachary's behavior. However, a few days into the trial, an unexpected development occurred. When called to testify about his mother's murder, Zachary claimed he did not commit the crime. This was surprising, especially since he had previously confessed to the police and discussed the incident for months. He now stated that he had no knowledge of who killed his mother and later accused his brother, Josh, of the murder, saying he tried to cover for him by taking the blame. No one believed this new story. As the evidence clearly pointed to Zachary as the perpetrator, it was evident to everyone that he was responsible for the crime, and it was well known that Josh was not involved in their mother's murder. On Friday, June 5, 2014, when Zachary was 17 years old, Sumner County Judge D. David Gay sentenced Zachary Davis to life in prison, with a minimum term of 60 years in Tennessee and the possibility of parole after 51 years. When he is eligible for parole, Zachary Davis will be about 68 years old. Whether this murder was a brutal murder or the result of a mental disorder, it is a tragic story of a family destroyed. Hello everyone. Today we will learn about another case, the case of Maria Fernanda Casada. For most people, family is the most important aspect of life. However, finding a trustworthy partner who can be the ideal husband and father is not always easy. Infatuation can cloud judgment, leading some individuals to commit to unsuitable partners, which can sometimes turn life into a nightmare. Maria Fernanda Casada lived in La Gloria, Nueva Costa Rica. Born in 1994, she was a kind and beautiful girl. She was a strong and independent woman with dreams of becoming a mother. She wasn't overly focused on her career. Instead, she valued the warmth and comfort of a family. She wished for siblings, but was her parents' only child. Her family is close-knit and loving, often held up as a model for other families. Her parents provided her with a comfortable home and a good education, which is still not accessible to everyone in Costa Rica. The environment there is not as favorable as in many other Latin American countries. Maria had a great relationship with her family, and she was especially close to her maternal aunt. They were similar in age, shared experiences, supported one another, and regularly met and communicated. Maria shared all her secrets with her aunt, and they felt like best friends. People recognized Maria as a friendly and outgoing person who could easily connect with strangers, which helped her make many friends. She fell in love for the first time at 19, believing it was a genuine feeling that would lead to happiness, a family, children, and a cozy cottage by the sea. Unfortunately, the reality was different. Her boyfriend took advantage of her and left when he became interested in someone else. To make matters worse, Maria discovered she was pregnant at that time. 9 months later, she gave birth to a boy. She hoped her ex-boyfriend would care for their son, but he showed no interest in either of them. Faced with this situation, Maria had to work hard to support herself and her child, as their financial situation was tight. She wanted to provide her son with a future as good as the one her parents had given her. Fortunately, her parents did not abandon her or the baby. They continued to support them, which helped create a stable environment for the child. During this challenging time, the family offered her the support she needed. Although it was difficult, they all managed to get through it together. This all took place during a time of advanced technology, which allowed Maria to use a computer and access the internet. She didn't want to just wait for things to improve. Instead, she sought an additional source of income by learning how to make handmade soap. After trying her hand at this craft, she discovered she had the potential for even more. This marked the beginning of Maria's journey as a skilled professional with a variety of talents. In addition to selling handmade soap to friends and online, she also learned how to do manicures. She created several groups on social media to showcase her skills, and her client base quickly began to expand. Maria dreamed of building her own website and eventually opening a salon. From the start, her efforts received positive feedback, and her clients were happy with her services. At this point, her main focus was on the well-being of her child and family, and she dedicated her free time to them. Maria longed for love and a family. She dreamed of finding a man to complete her. One day, while she was out in the city gathering materials, she met Esteban Rovira Vargas. He was 16 years older than she was, and despite their age difference, Maria fell deeply in love with him. It's unclear how he left such a strong impression on her, as he was very different from her. Esteban was hot-tempered and aggressive, with a complicated past linked to crime, although he avoided discussing it. Their romance lasted several months before Maria felt ready to introduce him to her family. The meeting was chaotic. Esteban made such a strong impact that her parents were firmly opposed to him. The primary issue with her parents stemmed from Esteban's rudeness, foul language, and blatant disrespect towards others. He came across as cruel and unpredictable. When Maria's parents noticed this, Esteban reacted so violently that Maria had to intervene to prevent a scandal. In the end, Maria's parents insisted that she completely end her relationship, but their efforts were in vain. Maria had strong feelings for Esteban and was determined to stay with him no matter what. Understanding this, her parents reconciled, not wanting to jeopardize their relationship with their daughter or lose the chance to have a future grandchild. A few days later, Maria met Esteban's family, who were just like him, tough and unkind, which made Maria uncomfortable. She confided in her aunt that Esteban was the most reasonable person in his family. Despite his difficult personality, their relationship continued to grow. Esteban appears surprisingly calm around Maria, seemingly relying on her to help curb his temper. On April 6, 2019, they got married. Unfortunately, shortly after the wedding, Esteban revealed that Maria's parents had been right about him. He became increasingly abusive, starting to physically assault her almost immediately. The abuse happened every day, and Maria suffered both physical and emotional torment while trying to keep their new family together. Moreover, she was pregnant with their second child, which made her feel that if she could just hold on, things would improve after the baby was born. Above all, Maria did not want to raise another child without a father. Maria gave birth to her second child in 2020 and became increasingly overwhelmed by the situation. Just before the baby arrived, she moved in with her parents because she could no longer cope and was worried about her health and the baby's safety. After the birth, her husband seemed to have a change of heart. He visited her, sincerely apologized for his past mistakes and the pain he had caused, thanked her for their new son, and promised never to hurt her or argue with her again. Maria believed her plan had worked, but her family, especially her mother and aunt, remained skeptical. They recognized this behavior as typical of manipulators and feared the cycle would repeat. In the following months, Esteban genuinely devoted his free time to Maria and their newborn. He behaved like a caring husband and father, refraining from violence. It appeared that their family life was improving, and they began to share joyful moments together. Esteban also started to spend more time with Maria's older son, who was 7 at the time. However, Maria noticed that he seemed to show more affection for his biological child. Despite this, she felt happy about the positive changes. Esteban even changed jobs, securing a well-paying position as a Spanish teacher in a private school for foreign students, which greatly improved their financial situation. Maria frequently told her friends and family that she was genuinely happy, and even her aunt began to believe it might be true. Maria often kept in touch with her family, sharing that after the birth of their son, Esteban changed drastically. he managed to hide his aggressive and cruel nature, making family life feel like the fairy tale she had always wanted. During this time, they posted many family photos on social media, portraying themselves as happy parents with their children. It appeared to be a happy and healthy family. In this seemingly peaceful environment, more than a year went by. However, Esteban was actually suppressing his anger, which was building up like a tightly wound spring, ready to snap. Eventually, he lost control. He shouted at his wife for no reason and physically harmed her, leaving bruises on her face. Maria, in tears, turned to her relatives to share what had happened. She was reluctant to go to the police, hoping that things would improve and that she could keep the family together for their child's sake. Unfortunately, the situation worsened quickly. After just a few incidents, Esteban began to pressure and torment her even more than he had before the baby was born. Her relatives urged her to end the relationship. Esteban had reverted to the cruel person he had always been, unable to control his inner demons. In December 2021, Maria decided she could no longer endure the abuse. She reported her husband, Esteban. When Maria went to the police station to file her report, she presented fresh bruises on her body. Esteban had struck her so hard that she had visible hematomas on her face. She expressed that this situation could not continue any longer. Maria was frightened for her safety and her children's well-being. During the police investigation, her claims were supported by both her family and several neighbors who had witnessed Esteban's aggressive behavior. Neighbors witnessed that she had faced constant abuse from her husband. He would provoke arguments almost every day, which often escalated into brutal beatings. Maria was so beaten down that she feared talking to Esteban, worried it would lead to another fight. Maria was frequently seen with bruises, and the cause was always the same. Ultimately, she was able to obtain a restraining order, which prohibited Esteban from approaching her or their son without her permission. She moved in with her relatives along with her sons. Maria warned her family that her husband should not be allowed near their home. If he was seen, they should call the police. Even after obtaining a restraining order, Esteban was often spotted near the Casada family's home. While he appeared to be loitering, it was clear he was looking for a chance to see Maria. Each time he was seen uninvited, he would leave quickly to avoid provoking a police call, but he continued to appear in the area, which was very concerning. Maria and Esteban were going through a divorce, along with custody and property disputes. Unfortunately, the process was progressing too slowly. Maria hoped to prove her husband's cruelty to ensure he would lose the chance to see their son. She feared that if he had contact with the boy, he would suffer the same abuse she had endured. On March 3, 2022, he showed up at Maria's parents' house without her permission. Some of her relatives were there, and they greeted Esteban with displeasure at the door. He requested to speak with Maria to address some issues regarding their divorce, emphasized that the discussion would focus on the division of their shared property. Witnesses present during the meeting observed that, despite his calm demeanor, Esteban was struggling to control his emotions. Maria consented to talk with her husband, particularly since he was not shouting or using foul language as he typically did. However, her family was concerned and advised her not to leave with a man they viewed as dangerous. Esteban insisted that Maria accompany him to retrieve some personal items she had forgotten during their hasty move. He also requested that their conversation remain private. Eventually, he persuaded her to get into the car. Esteban asked Maria to leave their older son with relatives, but he wants her to take the younger son with her. Maria agreed to this arrangement. As soon as they left her parents' house, arguments erupted again, starting the moment they were in the car. Esteban became more aggressive and eventually lost his temper, shouting loudly. They pulled over near the Casada family home, where a neighbor noticed them arguing inside the car. Upon arriving at the house where they had lived before separating, noise and upheaval could be heard. It seemed that Esteban was breaking things or physically harming his wife again. The child was crying from inside the house. Their 2-year-old son could be heard pleading with his father to stop. Outside, a neighbor heard Maria calling for help. The neighbor rushed to the house but realized he had left his phone behind and couldn't call the police. At that moment, Esteban called his sister, revealing that he had just killed his ex-wife in front of their son, claiming she had attacked him first. His sister was horrified and urged him to take the child and go to the police, but he ignored her. Instead, Esteban left the scene of the crime, still wearing the blood-stained shirt from the incident. He placed the child in the front passenger seat of the car and quickly drove away. Several neighbors called the police, and Esteban's sister also reported the incident. When the police arrived, Esteban had already left the scene. They sealed off the area where Maria was lying, where she was attacked by her husband in the kitchen. The police spoke to the neighbors who were gathered outside Esteban's home. The neighbors confirmed that Esteban had a long history of violent behavior. He was generally disliked in the community due to his rude and aggressive demeanor, often shouting at people for no reason, leading people to keep their distance. Although Maria eventually left him and obtained a restraining order, she made the mistake of getting back into his car. Meanwhile, a white car was driving down the road with Esteban and their 2-year-old son inside. The child was the only witness to the horrific murder, watching as his father stabbed his mother 11 times, mainly in her upper body and head. Maria tried to fight back, but she was powerless. Judging by the position of several wounds, Esteban had likely attacked her from behind. It did not seem as though she had provoked him. Her desperate attempts to fend off his assault were doomed to fail. Realizing that Esteban was trying to escape with their child, a large-scale operation was organized to capture him. The criminal's vehicle was put on alert, and several patrol units were dispatched to intercept him. His condition and intentions were unclear, and the child might be in danger. The police were hesitant to use force to stop the suspect because they feared for the boy's safety. Instead, they decided to follow Esteban. However, catching or even locating him proved to be extremely difficult. Shortly after the search began, officers found Esteban's abandoned car just a few kilometers from the scene of the violent incident, suggesting that Esteban had already switched vehicles. The police had no information about the car Esteban was currently using, and it appeared that he and the child had only one escape route, crossing the border. This raised the risk of losing track of them entirely, as Esteban could take a bus, use another car, or get a ride from someone. The authorities set up checkpoints in hopes of catching Esteban when he tried to cross the border. Fortunately, their strategy paid off. Within a few hours, they tracked him down at a checkpoint while he was attempting to pass through in a stolen vehicle. The border officers had been notified, so when he presented his identification, the chase ended. Esteban was arrested without any resistance. His 2-year-old son had been in the passenger seat the whole time and thankfully had not been harmed. During the search of the vehicle, authorities discovered a firearm and a blood-stained knife, which could have been the murder weapon used against Maria. It was puzzling why the suspect had not disposed of these items earlier. He was promptly sent to the police in his hometown and imprisoned. Esteban now faced serious charges of femicide and was subject to severe penalties typically imposed for such crimes in Latin America. After investigating the knife found in the vehicle, it was confirmed that the blood on it belonged to Maria, and the handle carried Esteban's fingerprints, leaving no doubt about his guilt. The custody of Maria's children was to be transferred to her parents. The older child was quickly placed in the care of Maria's parents. However, there were troubles involving the younger child. Even though Esteban had murdered the child's mother right in front of him and was awaiting trial in prison, Esteban still retained custody rights over the child under Costa Rican law. The boy became embroiled in a custody dispute between the families of his biological parents. The Vargas family aggressively sought custody, employing questionable tactics. They attempted to discredit Maria, suggesting that this could somehow excuse the murder. They claimed that Maria had neglected her sons for a long time and did not care for them properly. Instead, she pressured Esteban, which led him to lash out at her. Ultimately, they suggested that one day, during a heated argument related to their divorce, Maria attacked Esteban, leaving him no choice but to defend himself with a kitchen knife, resulting in wounds inflicted to stop her. They also attempted to portray Maria's parents negatively, arguing that they were unfit guardians. Maria's relatives had long spoken of her suffering from psychological and physical abuse, with accusations of beatings and threats supported by family, friends, and neighbors. Esteban's family depicted him as a victim, which many found hard to believe. Of course, this was a blatant lie. However, statements from Esteban's relatives complicated the prosecution's investigation, forcing them to challenge these claims and gather evidence to support the Casada family. As a result, a meeting was held to address the situation, which sparked activism from various feminist groups closely following this troubling case of violence. In March 2023, large protests demonstrated strong support for the victim's family. It was evident that the misleading narrative from Esteban and his relatives did not convince anyone, except perhaps the defense. The public wanted to ensure that the murderer faced severe punishment. Women across the country asserted that a lack of accountability only led to more violent crimes, and the statistics clearly supported their claims. The trial of Esteban Rovira Vargas, who abused his family, resumed in Santa Cruz on March 9, 2023. The prosecution argued that he deliberately killed his wife. In contrast, the defense, supported by Esteban and his family, claimed that he was actually the victim. However, their claims were quickly proven false, as the prosecution presented multiple witnesses, including neighbors, who testified to Esteban's violent behavior. Sadly, Maria's youth and innocence led her to make poor decisions, while the Vargas family's lies were exposed through forensic analysis, which conclusively resolved the case. The nature of Maria's injuries ruled out the possibility that she had attacked Esteban. 2 strikes to her back clearly indicated a planned assault. Esteban had intended to harm her from the outset. Maria's younger son could not serve as a witness due to his age. However, recordings of conversations with their 2-year-old child were presented in court. These recordings revealed that Esteban repeatedly acted aggressively and often assaulted Maria. The older son also testified, corroborating his brother's claims about the violence inflicted by Esteban. Both children were afraid of him, especially the older son, who was not Esteban's biological child and held a strong bias against him. As a result of their traumatic experiences and the loss of their mother, both sons were sent for psychological treatment. The prosecution sought a 37-year prison sentence for the defendant, while the defense maintained his innocence throughout the trial, attempting to reduce his sentence and even aiming for an acquittal. Fortunately, these efforts were unsuccessful. In May 2023, the court ruled in favor of Maria. The defendant, Esteban Rovira Vargas, was sentenced to 35 years and 8 months in prison, and he is currently serving his sentence in a maximum security facility. Additionally, Esteban was ordered to pay 75 million Costa Rican colones in compensation to Maria's family. Hello, everyone. Today we will learn about another case, the case of Gail Clevenger. Our story takes place in DeBerry, a small town in Florida near Orlando. Gail Clevenger, a 46-year-old mother and wife, is one of 6 children in a large family. Growing up in a dysfunctional home, she endured abuse from her parents. Not only did they struggle with alcoholism, but they also neglected their children, often falling into poverty and barely able to provide for the family. Gail had 4 sisters and a brother. Despite the misery and chaos of their home life, they found support in one another. Growing up in an unstable family made her fearless and independent. Gail remained strong, positive, and friendly. The difficulties she faced only strengthened her spirit. Throughout her life, Gail had a passion for art. She played the violin as a child. She dreamed of pursuing her talents in music and art, but quickly realized that achieving her goals would be difficult without her parents' support. As a result, she chose to work in a more practical and profitable field. In 1990, she graduated from high school and enrolled at the University of Miami to study architecture. Gail was highly intelligent, achieving excellent academic results and graduating with honors. As a young and energetic woman, she felt ready to take on any challenge. Although architecture is often seen as a difficult field, especially for women, Gail found her first job within a month and quickly advanced in her career. By the mid-1990s, she was in a serious relationship and had married her boyfriend. Unfortunately, their relationship was troubled from the beginning and soon became abusive. The trauma from her childhood resurfaced, and Gail faced a difficult battle. With the support of close friends, she was able to escape her husband's manipulation. They helped her numerous times and assisted her in obtaining a restraining order. Leaving this abusive marriage was a pivotal moment for her. The only bright spot during this time was the birth of her son, Gregory Logan Ramos, for whom she was able to secure full custody. Gail always hopes to find love and happiness. In the early 2000s, she met Danny, a calm and family-oriented man. She felt that her luck was finally changing and that she could build the loving family she had always dreamed of. Initially cautious, she grew more confident in Danny's suitability as a partner over time. About a year later, they decided to get married. By 2018, Gail was living with Danny, her son Gregory, and Danny's children, who had been abandoned by their biological mother. This new family gave Gregory a brother and a sister. During this period, Gail was thriving at work, but she faced challenges in her personal life, particularly with her biological son, Gregory. From an early age, Gregory exhibited limited social skills. While he had a few friends, he often struggled to fit in, particularly when confronted with new or unfamiliar situations. Worried about your child's condition, Gail wanted to help him develop social confidence. She enrolled him in karate classes, hoping that participating in a sport would boost his self-esteem and help him communicate better with peers. Unfortunately, the relationship between the siblings in the family did not develop as she expected. Gail put in a lot of effort to connect with her son. Many people recognized her as a caring and devoted mother who did everything for him. In her free time from work, she worked hard to create a nurturing environment for his upbringing, one that she had missed out on during her own childhood. She believed it was important for him to focus on his education and career, but her attempts to communicate this seemed to go unheard. At this time, the family lived in a large house where 15-year-old Gregory and his siblings each had their own rooms. Gail felt proud to have achieved her dream of a happy family life. However, not everyone shared her positive outlook. Gregory was in middle school, where he had a small circle of friends, but overall, he struggled to fit into society. His performance in class was average. He didn't stand out in any particular way and lacked enthusiasm for school activities. It seemed that his mother was more invested in his achievements than he was. He rarely met up with friends outside of school and preferred to spend most of his time alone in his room playing video games. His main hobby was gaming, and he also enjoyed listening to loud music late into the night in his room. During this time, he got into many conflicts and fights, attracting the attention of the police. His mother did her best to protect him from trouble and managed to persuade the police to give them a chance to sort things out. A psychologist then worked with Gregory and determined that he had no intelligence or developmental issues. Rather, he was simply too lazy to succeed and achieve his goals. At the age of 15, this situation was further complicated by the difficult transition period Gregory was experiencing. Gail was very concerned about her son's legal issues. She recognized that nothing serious had happened so far, but she feared that if they couldn't get him under control, it could lead to more significant problems. To address this, she tried to redirect Gregory's focus from video games to his studies. The consistent pressure from his mother resulted in improved academic performance. He began to do better in school. However, Gregory disliked any interference in his life and resisted her efforts. At the end of 2018, his grades started to decline again. He struggled with several new topics across different subjects. His mother attempted to explain everything to him, but Gregory stubbornly refused to listen. Gail and her children collaborated to encourage Gregory in his studies. On November 1, 2018, Danny and his children went to visit relatives in another city, leaving Gail alone with Gregory. Despite the lack of support during their discussion about his education, Gail continued to motivate Gregory, hoping to steer him back on track. That evening, she checked his grades and noticed that he was falling below the passing mark. Concerned, she arranged another talk with him, stressing the importance of focusing on his education to earn a good diploma, which would help him get into college and build a future. As usual, the rebellious teenager Gregory listened without displaying much emotion. The next morning, Gregory went to school as usual. He remained quiet and reserved, interacting only with a small group of friends. After school, he returned home around 3 p.m. The emergency services received a worrying call from a boy who identified himself as 15-year-old Gregory Logan Ramos. He reported that upon his return from school, he found the door to his home broken and the interior in disarray. He hesitated to go further inside, worried that an intruder might be hiding there. Gregory had been at school all day and was anxious because his mother's car was in the driveway, yet everything inside was eerily quiet. He feared that his mother might be in trouble. Gregory hadn't seen her and thought she could be at work, possibly borrowing someone else's car or getting a ride from a colleague that morning. However, the broken door and the mess inside raised concerns about his mother's safety. The dispatcher spoke with Gregory to gather more information about the situation, and a patrol car was sent to their home. When the officers arrived, they found Gregory waiting outside, visibly upset. He pointed out the broken door and appeared very distressed. By then, neighbors had noticed the commotion and approached to offer support. Gregory attempted to call his mother several times, but each attempt went unanswered. The police quickly searched the house, but found nothing out of the ordinary. There were no bloodstains or other signs of danger. They assessed the damage inside and concluded that the intruder seemed intent on destruction rather than theft. The officers wondered why the neighbors hadn't heard anything during such a chaotic event, but everyone just shrugged, seemingly indifferent. Gregory believed the robber had entered their home while he was at school. The most concerning issue was the disappearance of Gail. Gregory was extremely anxious, prompting the authorities to take him to a local medical center for evaluation and possible calming medication. The situation was further complicated by the lack of other family members present. Aside from Gail and Gregory, no one else was in the house. Although there were suspicions of revenge from the ex-husband, this theory was quickly ruled out because he had a solid alibi, confirmed by colleagues and surveillance footage showing he was at work. Gregory was deeply affected by the break-in and his mother's disappearance. He was later taken to the police station for a more in-depth discussion, where they hoped he would cooperate. However, Gregory was reluctant to assist. He took considerable time to think through his answers. His initial shock and confusion shifted to focus and anxiety. The officers noticed fresh scratches and bruises on Gregory's body, indicating he had been in some sort of struggle. He also had bruises under his eyes, and his face and hands were badly scraped. When asked about the incident, Gregory mentioned that he had been involved in a fight at school. However, when pressed for details and the names of the boys involved, he struggled to express himself clearly. He failed to mention the names of those who had instigated the conflict, and his responses seemed vague, as if he were making up a story on the spot. Sensing that the police were skeptical of his account, Gregory began to shy away from the topic during the questioning. One detective noticed the inconsistencies in his statements and started to focus on Gregory's body language. As the interrogation continued, Gregory grew increasingly anxious. The officers began to doubt his credibility. Gregory frequently played with his hair, rubbed his leg and arm, covered his eyes with his hand while responding, and crossed his limbs, all of which indicated his discomfort and desire to withdraw from the conversation. The detectives were piecing together the timeline of events from the past 2 days, focusing on the time he had spent alone with his mother at home to determine their next steps. One officer observed that Gregory could recount his morning routine and his return home from school with precise timing, as if he had rehearsed it. Gregory struggled to remember when he had last had dinner or the last time he saw his mother. This indicated that he was trying to focus on the timeline to avoid inconsistencies in his story, but he hadn't considered all the details, which left him unable to answer questions. The detectives were suspicious of Gregory, although his age made them hesitant. As the interrogation continued, one investigator wanted to learn about Gregory's relationship with his mother. Gregory became increasingly anxious. He repeatedly claimed he did not kill his mother, even though no one had asked him about it. He started talking about a group of friends he described as suspicious, suggesting that the police investigate them. By this point, Gregory had changed his story multiple times, and the police were closely monitoring the inconsistencies in his account. They kept pressing him for clarification. Eventually, he felt it was time to tell the truth. Gregory explained that the turning point happened the day before he called for help when he returned home from school. His mother slapped him for getting bad grades. Normally, she didn't react so violently, but this time, she lost control because he had failed biology. He reported that Gail began to hit and insult him. The situation escalated, forcing Gregory to defend himself. During the struggle, he managed to overpower his mother, but accidentally went too far. Realizing what had happened, he panicked and didn't understand his actions. In a state of confusion, he decided to hide his mother's body in a car and drove away to figure out what to do next. After the incident, he experienced a nervous breakdown and had several thoughts of ending his own life, but each time he managed to resist those urges. He wandered through the city and its outskirts until he discovered a quiet spot. There, he noticed a large blackened area from a campfire and started to dig. After digging a hole, Gregory pulled his mother's body out of the car and placed it in a shallow grave. He attempted to remove her wedding ring to sell it, but it wouldn't come off. Frustrated, he even tried cutting off her finger, but only injured it. Eventually, he left everything as it was, covered the hole with dirt and leaves, and went home as if nothing had happened. Feeling very tired, he planned to rest and go to school the next morning. His behavior was so calm that none of his classmates noticed anything unusual when they were questioned later. However, Gregory's troubles didn't end there. After returning home, he realized that his mother's sudden disappearance would raise suspicions. So, before school, he decided to fake a break-in and robbery. He planned to call the police when he got back. As he began his act in the morning, he found it too noisy and cumbersome to do alone, so he thought about recruiting his friends. According to the police, he successfully staged the break-in, aided by his knowledge of forensics, which he had gained from attending a related club. Gregory's friends, Dylan Seglerek and Brian Porras, drove over in the morning to pick him up for school. And on the way, Gregory made several significant mistakes. First, he couldn't keep quiet about his crime. He openly told his friends, Dylan and Brian, that he had killed his mother, even showing some pride in his confession. Gregory also asked his classmates to help him stage the crime scene. However, they thought it was a joke and were more interested in exploring someone else's house. After school, the group planned to search through Gregory's house. They skipped their last class and went to his house. Inside, there was no trace of his mother's body, but the house was a mess. The state of the house was a result of the three teenagers joyfully destroying everything after Gregory had let them. Meanwhile, the police noticed that some items were untouched. These belonged to Gregory and included a hunting rifle from his father, a hunting bow, a gaming computer, and other valuable possessions. After trashing the house, his friends wished him luck and left. However, their plan was not yet finished. Gregory contacted the police and pretended to be a scared son during the investigation. Some of Gail's belongings were found with Dylan, leading to his confession. It was more challenging to get a confession from Brian, who adamantly denied his involvement in the destruction. With the assistance of his friends, a timeline of events was reconstructed and verified by Gregory. It was clear that the act was carefully planned. It appeared to be premeditated murder rather than self-defense. By that time, many people who knew the Clevenger family had been interviewed, and they confirmed that Gregory had always been a troublemaker. They were not surprised that Gregory was capable of such an act. Despite the gravity of the situation, all three detainees were joking and having fun in the police station, unaware of the seriousness of their circumstances. Dylan and Brian might have expected a less severe consequence than a murder charge, but it was crucial to determine their actual involvement in the crime. After being questioned, all three individuals were taken to the Juvenile Justice Department and held in detention. Gail's body was found exactly where it had been indicated. Gregory had attempted to hide the grave, but did so carelessly, leaving part of her leg visible above the ground. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was strangulation. On November 4, 2018, 15-year-old Gregory Ramos was charged with first-degree murder of his mother, improper handling of a body, and tampering with evidence to avoid punishment. The hearings were filled with emotion. Gregory cried frequently and offered apologies to everyone present. Many felt that he did not genuinely regret his actions, but was instead trying to reduce his culpability. His family attended the courtroom. They were shocked by the events. Danny and his children were struggling to cope with Gail's death, as they had all loved her deeply. Several statements were made during the hearings. Gregory asked for mercy for his friends Brian and Dylan, insisting they were not involved in the crime. He repeated this claim, but the prosecution focused solely on the facts, continuing the investigation. According to Gregory, he and his friends were unaware of the full extent of the crime, and his friends did not believe that his mother had been murdered. When he realized the severity of the situation, he tried to make light of it, fabricating a story to explain why chaos ensued at home. Considering Gregory's age, he had a good chance of being acquitted or receiving a very light sentence. To reach a compromise, the prosecution proposed a plea deal. Because he was a minor, Gregory was not facing the death penalty, but if he confessed, he could avoid life imprisonment. Gregory accepted the deal and explained that he had an argument with his mother over a bad grade that evening. He did not argue back. Instead, he went to his room, slammed the door, and tried to sleep, but he couldn't. While Gregory was trying to sleep in his room, Gail called her husband, who was out of town, visiting relatives with their children. She told him about the argument with Gregory, and he reassured her, promising to come back in a couple of days to address the situation. The hurtful words his mother had said during the argument kept playing in Gregory's mind. Eventually, he left his room and confronted his mother again, and the argument escalated. In a moment of rage, Gregory attacked her, strangling her with his bare hands for about half an hour until she stopped breathing. It's important to note that during that time, he could have chosen to calm down and stop, making it difficult to classify his actions as unintentional. The court sentenced Gregory to 45 years in prison, allowing for parole after 25 years. He would also be on probation for the rest of his life. Although Gregory sought a lighter sentence, his friends faced difficulties. They were threatened with up to 30 years in prison following preliminary hearings. Their bail was denied. Gregory's history of mental illness, which raised concerns about the risk of self-harm or flight. Dylan was held without bail for 309 days, with bail set at $200,000, a sum beyond his family's financial means. By February 8, 2021, he had spent 828 days in the county jail and had not yet pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting the murder, leaving a jury trial pending. During the hearings, the prosecution lacked sufficient evidence to prove Dylan's involvement, leading the judge to propose a compromise. Ultimately, Dylan was sentenced to 10 years of probation. Brian experienced the least hardship. After preliminary hearings, he was allowed to post bail of $100,000. He faced standard restrictions during the investigation, but was able to complete his schooling and enroll in college without violating any conditions. On July 8, 2021, Brian appeared in court. His lawyers argued that over the 3 years he spent free, he had demonstrated that he was a responsible member of society and posed no threat to anyone. On the other side, Gail's family, including Danny and his children, believed that Brian, as a co-conspirator in the violent act, should serve at least 828 days in prison, just like his friend Dylan. They argued that he should receive the same punishment, followed by 10 years of probation. Brian's lawyer attempted to persuade the jurors that Brian had become a victim of his friend's poor choices and lack of judgment. Although Brian was involved in the incident, his age limited his understanding of the situation. Meanwhile, the prosecution maintained that he deserved punishment. They pointed out that Brian failed to report the incident to the police, despite being aware of his friend's confession about the murder of his mother. The defense countered by stating that neither Dylan nor Brian truly believed Gregory's claims. Ultimately, Brian was given a conditional sentence. Danny believes that Gregory's accomplices should have faced harsher penalties. He and others think they assisted Gregory in digging a grave and hiding his mother's body. This suggests that Gregory recruited his friends not just for the attack, but also for the burial. However, eventually, Danny stated that he had forgiven the teenagers, as he realized that no amount of anger or desire for revenge would bring his wife back. He chose to move on from the situation.